close your eyes. Or, if you prefer, simply allow your gaze to soften, to lose its focus on the specific objects and shapes that define your immediate world. Let the boundaries of things blur just for a moment. Take a slow, deliberate, and deeply conscious breath. Feel the air as it enters your body, a cool and invisible current, a silent gift from the world outside. And then, feel it as it leaves, a warm and gentle sigh, a quiet and complete release of all that is held. In this simple, profound, and steady rhythm of your own breathing, allow yourself to arrive fully in this present moment. Let the noise of the day that has passed, the endless cascade of thoughts, the chorus of responsibilities, the weight of memories and the pull of future plans, let it all begin to recede. Do not fight these thoughts. Simply observe them as you might observe clouds drifting across a vast and empty sky, or leaves floating down a slow, dark stream. Acknowledge them and then let them go. Let them drift on, past the horizon of your awareness. We are creating a space. A quiet, still, and sacred space, here in the sanctuary of your own mind. It is in this space that we will begin our journey. This is a journey not of the body, for the body is at rest. It is a journey of the mind and of the spirit. A journey into the silent, echoing corridors of our collective memory, into a place that no longer exists in stone and marble, but which has been built and rebuilt 1,000 times over in the shared consciousness of humanity. It is a journey to a lost continent of the intellect. We are going to a city of light and parchment. We are going to a dream of lost knowledge. We are going to Alexandria. But to truly understand the dream of Alexandria, to comprehend the sheer, breathtaking, almost insane audacity of its purpose, we must first journey back further still. We must travel to a time long before its golden foundations were ever laid upon the sands of the Egyptian coast, a time before its legendary lyrical name was ever spoken. We must travel back to the very dawn of an idea, the birth of the radical concept that a thought could be captured, that a story could outlive the storyteller, that knowledge itself could be wrestled from the ethereal realm of the mind and given a physical, tangible body. To do this, we must first immerse ourselves in the world that existed before. We must try to imagine, with the full power of our sensory imagination, a world without the written word. A world of pure, unanchored, and untethered memory. Imagine, if you can, a world where the entirety of a culture's accumulated knowledge, its history, its laws, its complex genealogies, its sacred and terrifying myths, its soul-stirring poetry, existed only in the fragile, finite, and fallible minds of living human beings. A world where a story, no matter how profound or essential, died forever with the last person who remembered it. A world where a brilliant discovery, a new and more accurate understanding of the movements of the stars, or the cycles of the seasons, vanished like smoke in the wind if it was not passed on directly, meticulously, mouth to ear, from one generation to the next. This was a world that demanded almost superhuman feats of memory. It was the great and noble age of the oral tradition. It was the time of the bard, the storyteller, the priest, the shaman, whose minds were the sole libraries of their people. Let us transport ourselves to a great hall in Mycenaean Greece, long before the age of Plato or Aristotle. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke from a central hearth, of roasting meat, and of spilled wine. The flickering firelight casts long, dancing shadows on the stone walls and on the intent, upturned faces of warriors and kings. At the head of the hall sits a blind poet, an Aiwados, his fingers plucking a simple four-stringed lyre. He begins to chant. His voice is a resonant, hypnotic drone, and the words he speaks are not his own. They are the words of generations. He is telling the story of the wrath of Achilles. He is recounting the 10-year journey of Odysseus. He does not read from a scroll. He reads from the vast, invisible library of his own mind, a library built from rhythm, from meter, from stock phrases and epic formulas that act as the scaffolding for his monumental recitation. 4 hours, 4 days, he can continue holding an entire community spellbound, reminding them of who they are, where they have come from, and the deeds of the gods and heroes who shaped their destiny. Now let us travel north, to the misty, primeval oak forests of ancient Gaul. Here, among the Celtic tribes, live the Druids, a secretive and powerful caste of priests, judges, and lore masters. A young apprentice Druid would spend up to 20 years in training, deep within the seclusion of a sacred grove. His task was not to read but to listen and to remember. He would commit to memory an enormous and complex body of knowledge, thousands of verses of poetry, the intricate details of the law, the long and branching genealogies of the tribal kings, the secret rituals for placating the gods, the astronomical knowledge needed to predict the solstices and the equinoxes. This knowledge was considered too sacred to be entrusted to the dead, inanimate form of writing. It had to live, breathe, and reside within a trained human mind. The Druids were the living books of their people, and their power and prestige came from this exclusive and arduous mastery of memory. And far to the east, in the hot plains of ancient India, the sacred Vedic hymns, the very foundation of Hindu scripture, were preserved for over 1,000 years through a meticulous and highly sophisticated system of oral transmission. This was not simple memorization. It was a sacred science. Priests of the Brahmin caste would learn the texts with a perfect, unalterable pronunciation and intonation, believing that the very sound of the words themselves held a creative, cosmic power. They developed complex mnemonic techniques, chanting the texts in various patterns, forwards, backwards, weaving words together, to ensure that not a single syllable was ever lost or corrupted. The human mind became a vessel, a sacred chalice, designed to hold the pure, unadulterated word of the divine. This world of oral tradition was a world of incredible mental prowess. But it was also a world of profound and constant fragility. The vessel of the human mind, for all its capacity, is ultimately mortal. A single forgotten generation, a single devastating plague that carries away the elders, a single catastrophic war that silences the bards and the priests, and 1,000 years of accumulated wisdom could be lost in an instant, forever. It was a world that lived with a deep, existential anxiety, a constant, heroic struggle against the encroaching silence of forgetting. The past was a flickering, fading whisper, and the future of knowledge depended entirely on the strength of a chain of memory, a chain in which every single link was a fragile human life. Then something changed. In the warm, fertile crescent of land nestled between the two great life-giving rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in the ancient land of Sumer, a profound, world-altering transformation began. It did not begin with a king's grand decree or a prophet's divine revelation. It began most likely in the quiet, dusty storeroom of a temple, with the humble, practical needs of an accountant. The growing cities of Sumer, like Uruk and Ur, were becoming complex organisms. The great temples were not just places of worship. They were vast economic engines. They owned land, employed workers, stored grain, raised livestock, and distributed rations of barley and beer. The human mind, for all its poetic power, struggled to keep track of it all. How many sheep were in the temple's flock? How many jars of oil were owed by a particular farmer? A new tool was needed, a tool for managing this new complexity. A Sumerian temple administrator, whose name is lost to time, took a lump of wet, pliable clay, the very substance of their world, the mud left behind by the river floods. He rolled it into a smooth, pillow-shaped tablet, small enough to fit comfortably in the palm of his hand. And with the sharpened point of a river reed, he made a mark. At first it was likely a simple picture, a pictogram. A stylized drawing of a head of barley, next to a series of marks to indicate a number. But drawing pictures is slow and inefficient. Over centuries these pictures evolved. They became more abstract, more stylized. The scribes found it was quicker to simply press the triangular tip of the stylus into the clay, creating a series of clean, wedge-shaped impressions. This was the birth of cuneiform script, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. The picture of a head of barley became a simple, elegant pattern of wedges. And with that simple, revolutionary act of abstraction, an idea was given a physical body for the very first time. A thought could now exist outside of the ephemeral, electrical pulses of a human brain. It could be stored on a shelf. It could be transported in a cart. It could be read by someone years later, in a different city, someone who had never met the original thinker. It was a technology for transcending the boundaries of time and space. It was a form of immortality. Let us, for a moment, feel the profound magic of this invention. Imagine yourself as a young apprentice scribe, sitting cross-legged on a reed mat in a Sumerian idubba, a tablet house, the world's first school. The air is warm and smells of dust and dry reeds. Your teacher, a stern master scribe, hands you a lump of cool, damp, carefully prepared clay. You feel its smooth, yielding surface, you smell its earthy, mineral scent. You hold your reed stylus, your kentuppy, its triangular tip sharpened to a fine point. Your teacher dictates a line from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and you begin to press the stylus into the clay. One press for a vertical wedge, a turn of the wrist for a horizontal one. You are not just making patterns, you are fossilizing a sound, a word, a thought. You make a mistake and you simply smooth the clay over and begin again. Once the lesson is complete, the tablet is left in the sun to bake, or perhaps fired in a kiln until it becomes as hard and as permanent as stone. You have created a piece of tangible memory. You have cheated death just a little. For millennia, the great civilizations of Mesopotamia, The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, built their vast and complex societies upon these humble but durable clay tablets. They built libraries of clay, archives containing hundreds of thousands of tablets, detailing everything from royal decrees, legal codes like that of Hammurabi, and precise astronomical observations of the movements of Venus, to intimate personal letters, schoolboy exercises, and the profound existential myths of their gods and heroes. Knowledge was now permanent, but it was heavy. A library was a warehouse of stone like bricks. Knowledge was durable, but it was not yet swift. At roughly the same time, but in a world with a profoundly different character, another, and very different, miracle of the mind was unfolding along the banks of the singular life-giving river Nile. The ancient Egyptians, in their magnificent, orderly, and deeply mystical civilization, developed their own unique system of writing, a breathtakingly beautiful and complex tapestry of pictures and symbols that the Greeks would later name hieroglyphs, from hieros, sacred, and glyph, carving. Carved with meticulous artistic care into the stone walls of tombs and temples, painted in brilliant colors onto coffins, and inscribed on monumental obelisks that reached for the sky, this was a form of writing that was also, and perhaps primarily, a sacred art. It was not just a record of speech, it was a ritual act, a way of using potent images to invoke divine power, to make things real, to ensure that the names of the gods and the deeds of the pharaohs would endure for all eternity, defying the forces of chaos and the finality of death. Let us imagine ourselves stepping out of the blinding Egyptian sun and into the cool, echoing darkness of a newly opened tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a space that has been sealed in perfect silence for 4,000 years. The air is still, dry, and smells of dust and ancient linen. You hold a torch aloft, and its flickering, living light dances across a wall covered from floor to ceiling in these intricate, magical figures. You see a poised ibis, the symbol of the god Thoth, the divine scribe who was said to have invented writing itself. You see a proud, powerful lion, a delicate, undulating ripple of water, a human eye, stylized and profound, seeming to watch you from across the millennia. This was a language of sublime beauty, a divine art form that spoke of eternity. It was a visual poem carved in stone, a promise that what was written would be made true forever. For everyday use, for letters and contracts and administrative records, the Egyptian scribes developed faster, cursive scripts called hieratic and later demotic. But the hieroglyphs remained the sacred script, the language of the gods. For thousands of years, then, knowledge was monumental. It was stone. It was clay. It was permanent, and it was deeply and inextricably tied to a specific sacred place. A temple, a palace, a tomb. It was not easily portable, it was not personal, and it was certainly not accessible to the common person. But the Egyptians had another, more humble and unassuming gift from their great river, a tall, slender green reed that grew in dense, impenetrable thickets in the marshy, life-choked shallows of the Nile Delta, the papyrus plant. And from this unassuming plant, they engineered a technological revolution that would change the course of human history. The process was one of patient, skilled, and almost alchemical craftsmanship. Workers would wade into the shallow, muddy waters to harvest the long, triangular stalks of the reed. They would then peel away the plant's tough, green outer rind, revealing the soft, white, fibrous pith within. This pith, the heart of the plant, was then painstakingly sliced into thin, translucent ribbon-like strips. These strips were laid side by side on a flat, wet board, their edges slightly overlapping to create a single, cohesive layer. A second layer of strips was then laid on top, at a right angle to the first, creating a strong, cross-hatched mat of cellulose fibers. This mat was then pressed under a heavy weight for several days, the plant's own sticky, sugary sap acting as a natural glue, bonding the fibers together into a single, unified sheet. Finally, the sheet was dried in the hot Egyptian sun and meticulously polished with a smooth, rounded stone or a piece of ivory until it became a single, seamless, remarkably durable, creamy white sheet of what we can rightly call paper. It was light. It was flexible. It was portable. When these individual sheets were glued together edge to edge, they could form a long, continuous roll, a scroll which could be wound around a wooden or bone rod, the umbilicus. For the first time in human history, knowledge had wings. A book, a biblos in Greek, named after the Phoenician port of Byblos from which papyrus was first exported to the Aegean world, could be held comfortably in the hand. A single, long poem, a play, a philosophical treatise, or a history could be contained in a single, lightweight, easily transportable object. It could be carried in a satchel across the desert. It could be taken aboard a ship and read on a long sea voyage. And most importantly, it could be collected. Knowledge no longer needed a monumental temple or a royal tomb to house it. It could be stored not just in a palace but in a room. An individual could own a book. A scholar could build a personal library. And a king could dream of a universal one. In this simple, elegant, and revolutionary technology of the papyrus scroll, the material seed of the Library of Alexandria was finally planted. The vessel was now ready. All that was needed was a mind with a vision powerful enough, and a city with a will strong enough, to fill it to overflowing. So the scroll exists. Knowledge can now travel. It is no longer bound to the heavy permanence of clay or the sacred immobility of stone. It can journey as light and as swift as an idea itself. But where does it travel to? And who will be there to receive it? A book without a reader is a silent, sleeping object. A collection of books without a community of scholars is merely a warehouse. For the dream of a universal library to be born, it required more than just the invention of the book. It required the invention of a new kind of city, a new kind of world. A world where the collection of knowledge was not just a possibility, but a passionate, driving imperative. And that world was forged in the mind and by the sword of one extraordinary world-changing individual. Let us now turn our gaze to the 4th century before the Common Era. The world is a complex and shifting tapestry of ancient empires and fiercely independent city-states. The colossal Persian Empire, the superpower of its day, stretches from the shores of the Aegean Sea to the mountains of India, a vast, multicultural, but aging and increasingly fragile entity. In Greece, the brilliant, quarrelsome city-states, Athens, Sparta, Thebes, have exhausted themselves in a century of ruinous internal conflicts, the Peloponnesian Wars. Their golden age of philosophy and drama is passing, and they are slowly, resentfully falling under the influence of a new rising power to their north, the Kingdom of Macedon. Macedon was a rugged, mountainous, and formidable land, considered by the sophisticated, urbanite Athenians to be semi-barbaric, a kingdom of hard-drinking, hard-fighting farmers and feudal lords, whose Greek was thick with an uncouth accent. But its king, Philip II, was a man of genius. He was a ruthless diplomat, a brilliant military strategist, and a visionary modernizer. He took the fractious Macedonian tribes and forged them into a single, powerful nation. He took the traditional Greek phalanx, the formation of heavily armed infantrymen, and refined it, lengthening the soldiers' spears to create the fearsome Macedonian sarissa, and integrating it with the devastating shock tactics of his elite heavy cavalry, the Companions. He created the most powerful army the world had yet seen. But Philip's greatest project was his son. A son in whom he saw the seeds of a destiny far greater than his own. A son named Alexander. To shape this extraordinary mind, Philip did something remarkable. He hired the greatest thinker of the age, the Athenian philosopher Aristotle, to be the boy's personal tutor. Aristotle, the student of Plato, was not just a philosopher in the abstract sense. He was a biologist, a logician, a political scientist, an empiricist, a man who believed that all true knowledge began with the careful, meticulous observation and categorization of the world around us. For several years, in a quiet, secluded sanctuary dedicated to the nymphs at Mysa, Aristotle opened the universe to the young, intense, and prodigiously intelligent prince. He taught him not just the rhetoric and politics that were standard for an aristocratic Greek education, but he instilled in him a profound and passionate respect for the natural world. He taught Alexander to study the anatomy of animals, the life cycles of plants, the constitutions of different city-states, the customs and religions of foreign peoples. He ignited in the young man a burning, insatiable curiosity, a desire not just to conquer the world, but to understand it in all its infinite, fascinating detail. As a parting gift, Aristotle gave Alexander a specially prepared and annotated copy of Homer's Iliad, which the prince would reportedly keep in a jeweled casket and sleep with under his pillow for the rest of his life. It was his Bible, a constant reminder of the glory, kleos, of heroes, the tragedy of war, and the immortal power of great stories. Aristotle's tutelage transformed Alexander. It gave his ambition a purpose beyond mere conquest. It fused the warrior's spirit with the scholar's mind. When Philip was assassinated, Alexander, at the tender age of 20, inherited the throne of Macedon and the command of his father's unstoppable army. After swiftly and brutally consolidating his power in Greece, he turned his gaze east towards the vast, glittering prize of the Persian Empire. He unleashed his army upon the world. In a breathtaking whirlwind series of campaigns over the next decade, a story that would itself become the stuff of myth, he shattered the Persian Empire. He won decisive victories at the Granicus River, at Issus, and at Gaugamela, defeating armies many times the size of his own through sheer tactical genius. He marched his men through the length of Anatolia, through the Levant, through Mesopotamia, and into the heart of Persia itself, capturing the legendary cities of Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis. He conquered Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule and crowned as a pharaoh. And still, he pushed on, driven by his insatiable pothos, his longing for the unknown, leading his increasingly weary army over the treacherous Hindu Kush mountains and down into the plains of India, reaching the very edges of what he considered to be the known world. But Alexander's campaigns were unlike any that had come before. They were not just military conquests. They were, in a very real sense, massive state-sponsored expeditions of discovery. He traveled with a hand-picked entourage of scholars, surveyors, engineers, botanists, and historians. These men were his intellectual core. They were tasked with mapping the new territories, with measuring distances, with documenting the exotic and unknown plants and animals they encountered, and with studying the customs, laws, and religions of the diverse peoples his army subdued. Every victory brought not just more land into his burgeoning empire, but more data, more information, more raw knowledge. He sent back specimens to his old teacher Aristotle in Athens. He commissioned reports. He was, in a very real sense, the first great collector of the world, a man whose ambition was to possess not just the planet's territory, but its accumulated wisdom as well. It was during his campaign in Egypt in the year 331 BC that he paused. He needed a capital for this new globalized world he was building, a world where Greek culture was being spread and blended with the ancient civilizations of the East, a world that would come to be known as the Hellenistic Age. He found the perfect location, a humble spot, a narrow strip of land on the northern coast of Egypt, a place occupied only by a small fishing village named Rhakotis. Here he stood between the deep blue of the Mediterranean Sea and the calm, brackish waters of Lake Mareotis, and he saw its immense potential. He saw a deep, natural harbor protected from the sea by a small island called Pharos. He saw its strategic position, perfectly placed to control the sea lanes of the Mediterranean and the rich trade flowing down the Nile from the heart of Africa. But he saw more than that. He saw a city that would not be purely Greek nor purely Egyptian, but something entirely new, a fusion of cultures. A place where the ancient, monumental wisdom of the pharaohs could meet the rational, inquisitive logic of the Greeks, and where both could be enriched by the trade, the spices, and the ideas flowing in from the east. He named it Alexandria after himself. And it was his core vision, a vision born from the philosophical teachings of Aristotle and forged in the crucible of his world-spanning conquest, that a city's greatness, its true and lasting glory, would be measured not just by the strength of its walls or the wealth in its treasury, but by the depth of its wisdom and the brilliance of its culture. The historian Plutarch tells us that Alexander, guided by a prophetic dream in which the poet Homer himself appeared to him, laid out the plans for the city with his own hands. He designed a grand grid of wide, parallel avenues, a city built for light, for the sea breeze, for public life and open, intellectual conversation. Using barley flour, the only thing at hand, he traced the lines of the great marketplace, the agora, the temples to both Greek and Egyptian gods, and the site for a magnificent royal palace. And though he would never live to see his vision fully realized, though he would die years later of a fever in the faraway palace of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, his body brought back in a golden sarcophagus to be entombed in the very city he founded, his dream was so powerful, so precise, so charged with his incredible will, that it took on a life of its own. It became a blueprint for the future, a promise of a new kind of city for a new kind of world. When Alexander died suddenly without a clear heir, his vast, multi-ethnic empire, which was held together only by the force of his personality, almost immediately fractured. His most powerful and ambitious generals, the Diadochi, the successors, turned on one another, carving up the world he had conquered in a series of brutal and complex wars that would last for over 40 years. But the man who, through a combination of shrewdness, caution, and military skill, managed to claim the glittering prize of Egypt, the oldest and richest land in the world, was different. Ptolemy, son of Lagos, who would later take the epithet Soter, or the Savior, had been one of Alexander's oldest friends, a boyhood companion, and one of his most trusted commanders. He was also a man of intellect and culture, a historian who would later write his own laudatory but valuable account of Alexander's campaigns. He understood, perhaps better than any of the other generals, that the true legacy of Alexander was not the fragile empire of land, which was already crumbling, but the more enduring empire of the mind. Ptolemy established his capital in the still-growing city of Alexandria and set about making his old friend's dream a concrete reality. He declared himself pharaoh, founding a Greek-speaking dynasty that would rule Egypt for the next 300 years. To make Alexandria the undisputed intellectual, cultural, and economic center of the entire Hellenistic world, he knew he needed to build an institution that would be the envy of all others, an institution that would draw the world's greatest minds to his city like moths to a brilliant flame. He began the project, and his son, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, a man who inherited his father's intelligence but possessed an even greater measure of ambition and a flair for magnificent, theatrical displays of wealth and power, brought it to its glorious, unparalleled zenith. It was they, the first two Ptolemies, who founded the Mauson, the House of the Muses. The 9 muses of Greek mythology were the goddesses of all the arts and sciences: history, poetry, comedy, tragedy, music, dance, astronomy. And this new institution was to be their earthly home, a sacred space dedicated to the pursuit of all knowledge. It was a revolutionary concept, a radical departure from the philosophical schools of Athens, which were private institutions centered on the teachings of a single master. The Mausion was a public, state-funded institution, a sanctuary for the mind on an unprecedented scale. The Ptolemies invited the most brilliant and famous scholars, poets, mathematicians, and physicians from across the entire Greek-speaking world to become resident fellows. They were offered a proposition that was, for any true intellectual, almost impossible to refuse: come to Alexandria. We will give you a generous lifetime salary, a complete exemption from all taxes, free food and lodging for you and your family in the royal quarter, and the service of slaves to attend to your daily needs. In return, you will have no specific teaching duties, no required output of books, no administrative burdens. You will have only one mandate: to pursue knowledge for its own sake. To dedicate your entire life, free from all worldly cares, to research, to study, to writing, and to fierce, collaborative, and competitive intellectual debate. Let us try to imagine, with more sensory detail, the daily life of a scholar at the Mausion in its golden age around 250 BC. You are, perhaps, a geometer from Athens, a young man who has shown some promise and has received the coveted royal invitation. You wake in your comfortable, sunlit apartments within the Bruchion, the royal quarter of the city. You hear the distant sound of the sea, the cries of exotic birds from the palace gardens. You dress in a simple linen chiton. You do not worry about where your next meal will come from, or how you will pay your rent. Your only concern is the problem that you have been wrestling with for weeks, a problem concerning the properties of conic sections. You walk along a beautiful covered colonnade, a peripatos, its gleaming white marble pillars casting long sharp shadows in the cool morning air. You are walking in the very footsteps of Aristotle, whose school in Athens was also called the Peripatetic School because he taught while walking. You greet a fellow scholar, perhaps it is the great poet Theocritus, who nods to you with a gentle, distracted smile, his mind clearly on a line of verse. You pass a group of physicians engaged in a heated debate in rapid technical Greek about the function of the nervous system. You fall into a conversation with a historian who has just been studying a newly acquired text, a local history of a city in Asia Minor, and he shares a fascinating anecdote. You might spend your morning in the Great Library itself, the heart of the Mausion. A librarian, a bibliothekos, retrieves for you a rare and ancient text by Eudoxus of Cnidus, a mathematician who lived a century before you. You sit at a heavy wooden table in a quiet, sunlit hall, carefully unrolling the fragile papyrus. The only sound is the soft, dry rustle of the scroll. In the afternoon, you could attend a public lecture by a visiting scholar from Rhodes, a famous rhetorician, and marvel at the polished perfection of his arguments. Or perhaps you attend a public dissection in the anatomy theater. This is something new, something shocking, something only possible here in Alexandria. You watch as Herophilus, the great physician, with his steady, precise hands, reveals the intricate hidden structures of the human body, explaining the functions of the organs, the pathways of the veins and arteries. You are witnessing the birth of a true empirical science of medicine. You might visit the botanical gardens to study a strange and beautiful new species of lily, a plant brought back from a trading mission to the distant lands of India, and you discuss its properties with a botanist. You might visit the zoo, a paradisos, to observe the habits of a giraffe, a rhinoceros, or an elephant, creatures that seem to have walked out of a myth. In the evening, you gather with all the other scholars, perhaps 100 of them, in a grand communal dining hall. You recline on couches as is the Greek custom. The food is simple but plentiful, the wine is good. And after the meal, a symposium begins. This is not a formal lecture, but a free-flowing, wide-ranging, and often contentious conversation and debate. The topic for the evening might be a line from Homer, the nature of the soul, a new astronomical theory, or the ideal form of government. You are surrounded by the sharpest, most creative, most knowledgeable minds of your generation. You argue, you laugh, you learn. You go to sleep, your mind buzzing with new ideas, new questions, new connections. It was an intellectual paradise, a state-sponsored haven for the curious mind, a place deliberately and brilliantly designed to foster the kind of serendipitous discoveries that can only happen when brilliant people from different fields are brought together, given the resources they need, and set free. And at the very center of this intellectual paradise, the engine that drove its relentless quest for knowledge, the sacred hearth around which this community of scholars gathered, was the Great Library. Its purpose, as we have noted, was breathtakingly simple in its conception and almost impossibly audacious in its scope. It was an institution founded on a single radical and profoundly optimistic belief, that all the knowledge of all humanity from all cultures and all times, could and should be gathered together in one place under one roof. It was a conscious attempt to create a universal archive of the human spirit, a place where all of our species' stories, discoveries, dreams, and even our follies could be collected, organized, preserved, and, most importantly, studied. The scope of this ambition cannot be overstated. It was the ancient world's equivalent of the Internet, the Human Genome Project, and the mission to Mars all rolled into one. A monumental, multi-generational undertaking that would require the wealth of a kingdom and the unwavering will of its rulers. The agents of the Ptolemies, the royal procurers of books, were dispatched across the entire known world. Imagine them, these scholarly spies, these intellectual adventurers. They were men of learning, often scholars from the Maussan themselves, fluent in multiple languages, armed with seemingly limitless funds from the royal treasury. They traveled on merchant ships to the bustling, cosmopolitan book markets of Athens and Rhodes, cities that had long been centers of philosophy and literature. There they would outbid all private collectors and representatives from rival cities, like the agents of the king of Pergamum, who was attempting to build his own, competing library. They pursued rumors of old, forgotten private libraries, perhaps belonging to the descendants of a famous philosopher or playwright, and would buy the entire collection, lock, stock, and barrel. They paid handsome fees to scribes in distant cities to make fresh, high-quality copies of important manuscripts held in the sacred archives of temples or the state records of a city-state. No price was too high, no journey too arduous, when the prize was a lost play of Sophocles, a forgotten history of the Persian Wars, or a scientific treatise from a Pythagorean mathematician. But the most famous and by far the most aggressive of their acquisition policies was the one enacted in Alexandria's own harbor, a testament to the Ptolemies' single-minded determination. Every single ship that docked in the city's great harbor, without exception, was, by royal decree, to be boarded and searched by a special detachment of royal scribes and soldiers. They were not looking for smuggled goods, for untaxed wine, or for weapons. They were looking for books. Any and every papyrus scroll found aboard any vessel, whether it belonged to a wealthy merchant, a traveling diplomat, a Roman tourist, or a simple sailor, was immediately confiscated. These seized scrolls were then taken with great care to a special wing of the library, a bustling scriptorium filled with a small army of the most highly skilled scribes in the world. There, the book was carefully and precisely copied onto the finest quality papyrus. The original scroll, now considered the property of the Egyptian state, was then accessioned into the library's permanent collection, given a catalog number, and placed in its appropriate niche in the stacks. The brand new copy, a perfect and often more legible replica of their own book, was then returned to the ship's owner with the state's formal apologies and compliments, a gift from the pharaoh. Imagine the frustration and the secret pride of those travelers. They had been robbed, yet they had also contributed, involuntarily, to the greatest intellectual project of their time. Through this systematic, state-sponsored policy of intellectual piracy, Alexandria's collection grew at an exponential rate. The library became a kind of cultural center of gravity, a black hole for books, a vortex of knowledge, drawing in scrolls and ideas from every corner of the known world. And what a collection it was! To truly appreciate its scale, we must first understand in more detail what a book was in this era. Let us conjure the physical object itself. A papyrus scroll. It is a long, continuous sheet, formed of 20 or more individual papyrus sheets glued together, perhaps 20 to 30 feet long and about 10 inches high. It is wound tightly around a central wooden or bone rod, the umbilicus, which may be tipped with ornate, carved knobs of ivory or bronze. To protect it, the scroll is often wrapped in a sheath of linen or dyed parchment, a kind of ancient dust jacket. From the top of the roll dangles a small rectangular tag of baked clay or parchment, the syllabus, upon which is written in neat ink, the title of the work and the name of its author. To read it, you must sit down at a table or recline on a couch. You hold the scroll with both hands. You carefully unroll it from the left with one hand, revealing a series of narrow, neatly written columns of text, and you roll up the portion you have just read with your other hand. The experience is linear, sequential. You cannot easily jump from one section to another as we do by flipping pages. There are no page numbers, no chapters in our modern sense, no table of contents, no index. The text is often written in scriptio continua, a continuous, unbroken stream of letters, with no spaces between the words and little or no punctuation. Reading, therefore, is not a silent, private act of rapid scanning as it is for us. It is a slow, deliberate, and often vocalized process of deciphering, of sounding out the words to find their meaning. It requires intense concentration and skill. And these objects were fragile. In the damp, humid air of the Mediterranean climate, a papyrus scroll was susceptible to mold and decay. It was a favorite food of bookworms and other insects. And, of course, it was supremely vulnerable to fire. Each and every scroll was a precious, handmade object, the product of many hours of skilled labor by a scribe. And the Library of Alexandria, at its zenith, held tens of thousands and eventually, according to some ancient sources, hundreds of thousands of them. The sheer logistical challenge of housing, preserving, and organizing such a collection is almost impossible for us to comprehend. Let us now, in the quiet of our minds, push open the great cedarwood doors of the library itself. Let us pass through the grand, sun-drenched portico and enter the world within. The first sensation is one of cool air and a profound, reverent quiet. The transition from the bright, noisy, chaotic world of the city outside to the serene, ordered world within is absolute. The scale of the main reading hall, the bibliothèque, is vast, designed to inspire awe and to humble the individual scholar before the immense majesty of the collective human intellect. The light is soft and diffused, streaming in from high, slit-like clerestory windows, far above the ground, a design feature that not only provided light for reading but also protected the precious scrolls from the direct, damaging rays of the Egyptian sun. The air is still and fragrant, carrying the complex and unforgettable scent of the ancient world of learning. The dry, slightly sweet, almost hay-like perfume of aging papyrus, mingled with the faint, aromatic and preservative tang of the cedarwood oil with which the scrolls were treated, and perhaps a hint of incense burned in honor of the muses. The walls of the great hall are made of polished, creamy white marble, but you can barely see them. They are hidden behind a towering, intricate lattice of wooden shelves, a floor-to-ceiling honeycomb of thousands upon thousands of individual niches, each one filled with the neat, pale cylinders of the papyrus scrolls. They are stacked horizontally, their colorful syllaboi dangling like a fringe of strange, inscribed fruit, a riot of silent titles. The sheer visual impact is overwhelming. It is not a room of books, it is a city of books, a metropolis of thought. You see librarians, known as bibliothecae, who are themselves highly respected scholars, moving silently on soft, papyrus-soled sandals. They consult with readers, they retrieve scrolls from the higher shelves using tall, rolling wooden ladders, their movements practiced and economical. In a large, adjoining room, the scriptorium, you can hear the faint, soft, collective scratching of dozens of reed pens on papyrus. Here, a small army of highly skilled scribes, many of them educated slaves, are at work from dawn until dusk. Some are creating perfect copies of worn-out or damaged scrolls from the main collection, ensuring their survival. Others are transcribing the texts that have just been confiscated from the ships in the harbor. The room is a silent, focused factory for the production and preservation of knowledge. And everywhere, scattered throughout the various halls and antechambers, are the scholars. They sit at long, heavy wooden tables. They recline on couches in small, quiet reading alcoves. They stand in small groups in the shaded porticos of an inner courtyard, engaged in hushed but intense debate. Here is a geometer, his brow furrowed in concentration, hunched over a low table, a tray covered in fine, smooth sand before him. He is not writing. He is drawing using a thin wooden stylus to trace the elegant, perfect lines of a geometric proof, a diagram of circles and triangles that reveals a timeless, universal truth. When he is finished, he will simply smooth the sand over and begin again. The thought is what matters, not its temporary physical form. In another corner, a poet, a man with a faraway look in his eyes, is softly murmuring lines from a lost play of Euripides. He is a philologist, a lover of words, and he is trying to reconstruct a corrupted passage, to find the original meter, the perfect, inevitable word that the master himself would have used. He is engaged in a conversation across the centuries. In a quieter, more private room, A physician is carefully, reverently unrolling a fragile, ancient medical text attributed to the legendary physician Hippocrates. He is comparing the text's description of the symptoms of a lung disease with his own recent clinical observations, which he has recorded on a wax tablet. He is testing the wisdom of the past against the evidence of the present. These scholars are not just passively reading. They are engaged in a great, collective, and ongoing conversation. A conversation with the past, a dialogue with the greatest minds of centuries gone by. And they are engaged in a conversation with each other, a living, breathing, and often fiercely competitive intellectual community. This was the true genius of the Mouseion. It was not just a library, it was a university in the truest sense of the word, a place where the collision of different ideas and different disciplines could create new sparks of insight. A historian might ask a geographer for help in understanding the terrain of an ancient battle. An astronomer might consult a mathematician to help model the complex movements of the planets. An engineer might build a working model to test a theoretical principle described by a physicist. It was this constant cross-pollination of ideas, this fusion of theory and practice, that made Alexandria the intellectual supernova of the ancient world. But this vibrant ecosystem of knowledge could not have functioned without a system. The sheer volume of information threatened to become a chaotic, unusable flood. The challenge of organizing the library was a monumental intellectual task in its own right, a challenge that required the invention of a whole new science, the science of librarianship. Imagine again that you are the first chief librarian, Xenodotus of Ephesus, a renowned Homeric scholar. You are standing in a hall filled with perhaps 50,000 scrolls, a chaotic torrent of knowledge acquired from 100 different sources. They have arrived from all over the world. Many have no title or multiple conflicting titles. Some are attributed to different authors and different versions. Some are incomplete, fragments of a larger whole. Some are beautiful, high-quality copies. Others are cheap, commercial copies riddled with scribal errors. How do you even begin to make sense of this glorious, overwhelming chaos? You cannot simply stack them on shelves. You would need to invent a system. Xenodotus and his brilliant successors did just that. They created what we would now call a scholarly workflow, a systematic process for turning a chaotic collection of texts into an organized, accessible, and reliable library. First, a newly acquired scroll would be logged and given a preliminary identification number. Then it would be examined by a team of senior scholars. Is it an authentic work of the author it claims, or is it a later forgery? Is it a known work, a new and better copy of a text the library already possesses, or is it something entirely new, a lost treasure? The scroll would then go to the editors, the philologists. This was perhaps the most crucial and time-consuming work of the entire institution. A team of experts, specializing in a particular author or genre, would painstakingly compare the new scroll with any other existing versions of the same text already in the library's collection. They would debate every single line, every word, every letter. Was this the word the original author intended? Or was this a scribe's mistake, a slip of the reed pen from 100 years ago, an error that had been copied and recopied ever since? They would act as literary detectives, using their deep knowledge of an author's style, vocabulary, and meter to reconstruct the most accurate possible version of the text. They would make corrections, they would note interesting variations in the margins, and they would produce a new, definitive master copy, which was called an ekdosis. This corrected and authenticated text would then be copied by the scribes in the scriptorium, and these new high-quality Alexandrian edition copies would be made available for scholars to study. It was a rigorous, peer-reviewed factory for producing accurate and reliable knowledge. And in this painstaking, often anonymous process, they standardized the canonical texts of Greek literature and philosophy, the very texts that, in their surviving forms, have come down to us. The reason our modern versions of Homer or Plato are so coherent and readable is largely due to the meticulous, scholarly labor of these forgotten intellectual heroes in Alexandria. Let us delve deeper into the lives and minds of these extraordinary scholar librarians, for they were not merely custodians of a collection, they were the architects of a new intellectual order. They were the men who had to invent the very tools and concepts of scholarship from first principles. Consider Aristophanes of Byzantium, who succeeded Eratosthenes as the chief librarian in the early 2nd century BC. He was a man of immense erudition and a genius for systematic organization. He lived in a world where written Greek was still a challenging and ambiguous medium. Texts, as we have noted, were written in scriptio continua, a continuous stream of capital letters, without spaces between words, without punctuation, and without the accent marks that were crucial for correct pronunciation and meaning in a language where the placement of an accent could change a word's definition entirely. Reading was a slow, difficult process of deciphering, and the potential for misinterpretation was enormous. Aristophanes, in a series of brilliant innovations, sought to bring clarity and precision to the written word. He is widely credited with inventing the system of Greek accent marks, the acute, the grave, and the circumflex, which are still used in written Greek to this day. By adding these small marks above the vowels, he provided the reader with a clear guide to the pronunciation and stress of each word, dramatically reducing ambiguity. But he went further. He developed a rudimentary but effective system of punctuation, a system of dots placed at different heights relative to the letters to indicate pauses of different lengths. A dot at the top of the line, stigmi tellier, marked a full stop, the end of a complete thought, the ancestor of our period. A dot in the middle of the line, stigmi misi, marked a significant pause, a division within a sentence, akin to our colon or semicolon. And a dot at the bottom of the line, hypostigm, marked a smaller, subordinate pause, the equivalent of our comma. These may seem like small, technical, almost trivial innovations to us, who live in a world saturated with highly standardized text. But for the ancient world, they were revolutionary. They were tools for clarifying thought itself. They transformed the written text from a continuous, monolithic block of letters into a structured, articulated representation of spoken language, with its own inherent rhythm and logic. It made texts easier to read, easier to understand, and, most importantly, easier to analyze with precision. He also continued and refined the work of his predecessors in arranging long works into more manageable, standardized divisions. He is credited with dividing the plays of the great Greek tragedians and comedians into acts and scenes, and with arranging the poems of lyric poets like Pindar and Alcaeus into books of a standard length, making it much easier for later scholars to handle, reference, and comment upon these foundational texts. Aristophanes of Byzantium was not just organizing a library, he was organizing the very structure of written language, creating the grammatical and editorial architecture that we have inherited. His successor as chief librarian, Aristarchus of Samothrace, was perhaps the greatest literary critic and Homeric scholar of the entire ancient world. He was a man of fierce intellect and exacting standards. He dedicated his life to producing the definitive critical editions of the Iliad and the Odyssey. He collated hundreds of different manuscripts from different places and different time periods, comparing them word by word. He developed a complex system of critical symbols, which he would place in the margins of his texts to indicate his scholarly judgments. A small spear, an obelus, marked a line he believed to be spurious, a later interpolation not written by Homer himself. An asterisk marked a line he thought was particularly beautiful or noteworthy. He wrote extensive commentaries, hypomnemata, explaining his editorial decisions, debating the meaning of obscure words, and analyzing the poem's literary qualities. He was, in essence, the father of the modern scholarly edition. His work on Homer was so authoritative that it became the standard text for the next 1,000 years. The reason that you and I can read a clear, coherent, and powerful version of the Iliad today is, in no small part, due to the lifelong, obsessive, and brilliant labor of this single man in a quiet hall in Alexandria 2,200 years ago. This immense scholarly apparatus, this fusion of obsessive collecting and rigorous critical analysis, was the engine that powered the scientific discoveries of the Mouseion. The scientists did not work in a vacuum, plucking their ideas from thin air. They worked within a living, breathing, deeply interconnected ecosystem of knowledge. Let us revisit Eratosthenes, the polymath librarian, as he prepares to calculate the circumference of the Earth. His experiment, for all its conceptual brilliance, would have been impossible without the resources of the library. How did he know the precise distance between Alexandria and the city of Syene, far to the south? He could walk into the library and consult its vast collection of geographical surveys and military itineraries, the records of the Bemadists, the trained surveyors who had marched with Alexander's armies and had measured the distances between cities with remarkable accuracy. How did he know that Syene was located directly on the Tropic of Cancer? He could consult the library's unparalleled collection of astronomical records, records that had been compiled over centuries by Egyptian and Babylonian skywatchers. The library was his database. It was his laboratory. It provided him with the raw data, the accumulated observations of generations, that he could then synthesize and illuminate with the piercing light of his own geometric genius. Let us now return to the anatomy theater, to the physician Herophilus. His work was, in many ways, even more radical than that of the astronomers. While the Greeks had long dissected animals, the dissection of the human body was surrounded by powerful and ancient taboos. The human corpse was considered sacred, and its desecration was a profound act of impiety. But the Ptolemies, in their unique position as Greek pharaohs, ruled over a culture, the Egyptian, which had a much more pragmatic and ancient relationship with the dead body. The entire practice of mummification was, in essence, a form of dissection. The Ptolemies, driven by a thirst for knowledge that outweighed their adherence to traditional Greek custom, gave the physicians of the Mauseion royal permission to perform systematic dissections of human cadavers, likely the bodies of executed criminals. For the first time, a scientist could look directly at the hidden, intricate machinery of the human body. Let us imagine ourselves in that room. The air is probably thick with the smell of preservatives, perhaps natron or cedar oil. A body lies on a marble slab. Herophilus, his face a mask of intense intellectual concentration, is working with a small, sharp bronze scalpel. His students, a small group of aspiring physicians, are gathered around, watching in a mixture of awe and trepidation. He is not just cutting, he is exploring, mapping a new continent. He carefully traces the pathways of the nerves from the spinal cord to the limbs, and he is the first to distinguish between motor nerves, which carry the brain's commands to the muscles, and sensory nerves, which carry information from the world back to the brain. He dissects the brain itself, that mysterious, soft and silent organ. He distinguishes the cerebrum, the larger, wrinkled part, from the cerebellum, and he correctly surmises that the brain, not the heart as Aristotle had believed, is the seat of intelligence and consciousness. He dissects the eye, describing the retina and the optic nerve. He studies the liver, the pancreas, the reproductive organs. He is writing the first accurate, detailed, and empirical description of human anatomy. His work, and that of his contemporary and rival Erasistratus, who focused on the heart and the circulatory system, created a solid, scientific foundation for the practice of medicine. It was a foundation that would be largely forgotten in Europe after the fall of Rome, a foundation that would have to be painstakingly and courageously rebuilt from scratch by Vesalius in the Renaissance, over 1500 years later. The knowledge was there, recorded on the scrolls in Alexandria, but the cultural will to preserve and build upon it would eventually fade. The scope of the library's collection was truly universal, at least by the standards of its time. While its primary focus was naturally on the literature and science of the Greek-speaking world, the Ptolemies were keenly interested in the wisdom of the older civilizations they now ruled and interacted with. A crucial part of the library's mission was translation. Let us return to the story of Manetho, the Egyptian priest from Sebennytos who lived during the reigns of the first two Ptolemies. He was a man who stood with a foot in two worlds. He was a keeper of the ancient traditions of his own people, literate in the ancient hieroglyphic and hieratic scripts. But he was also fluent in Greek and comfortable in the intellectual world of the Mauseion. He was commissioned by the king, perhaps by Ptolemy II himself, to write a complete and authoritative history of his own country, Egypt, in the Greek language. For this monumental work, the Egyptiaca, Manetho drew upon the sacred and ancient temple archives, the king lists, and the oral traditions that had been preserved by the Egyptian priesthood for millennia. He organized the long, bewildering history of the pharaohs into the system of 30 dynasties that is still used by Egyptologists to this day. His original work is now lost, a casualty of the library's slow demise. But it was so important, so foundational, that it was widely quoted and summarized by later historians like the Jewish historian Josephus and the early Christian chronographers. It is through these later, second-hand fragments that we have our basic chronological framework for the history of ancient Egypt. Imagine what the original must have contained: the detailed stories, the religious context, the cultural richness that has been lost forever. A similar project was undertaken by Berossus, a Babylonian priest of Bel, who wrote a history of his own civilization, the Babyloniaca, in Greek. Like Manetho, he drew upon the cuneiform archives of the ancient temples of Mesopotamia. His work gave the Greek-speaking world its first real insight into the epic myths of Gilgamesh, the creation story of the Enuma Elish, and the vast, cyclical cosmology of the Babylonians. His work, too, is now lost, surviving only in tantalizing, fragmented quotations. The Library of Alexandria was not just a project of Greek cultural assertion. It was the world's first great project of cross-cultural translation and understanding. And perhaps the most influential translation project of all was the one that would shape the future of the Western world in ways that no one at the time could have possibly imagined. As we have noted, Alexandria was home to the largest and most vibrant Jewish community in the world outside of Judea itself. This was a prosperous, Greek-speaking community, and for many of the younger generation, the ancient Hebrew of their sacred texts was becoming a foreign language. A great need and a great desire arose to translate the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, into the Koine Greek that was the universal language of their world. According to a story, perhaps legendary but containing a core of truth, Ptolemy II Philadelphus himself sponsored this monumental undertaking. The story is told in the letter of Aristes. The king, wanting to add the laws of the Jews to his great library, sent a delegation to the high priest in Jerusalem. The high priest selected 6 elders from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, for a total of 72 scholars, all of them masters of both Hebrew and Greek. They were brought to Alexandria and taken to a quiet retreat on the island of Pharos. There, working independently, they each translated the entire Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. And when they were finished and their translations were compared, they were found to be miraculously identical, word for word. This story, the legend of the Septuagint, or the translation of the 70, almost certainly embellishes the facts. The translation was likely done over a much longer period of time, by many different scholars, and was probably motivated more by the needs of the Alexandrian Jewish community than by the king's literary curiosity. But the result was a monumental achievement. It was the first time that the sacred texts of Judaism were made accessible to the entire, vast, Greek-speaking world. It was a work of immense scholarship, one that required the translators to invent new Greek words and concepts to capture the unique theological ideas of the Hebrew original. And this Greek version of the Bible became the foundational text for the early Christians. When the apostles and evangelists of the new Christian faith, like St. Paul, quoted the scriptures, they were almost always quoting from the Greek Septuagint, the version of the Old Testament that they and their Greek-speaking converts knew. The act of translation that took place in Alexandria created the linguistic and conceptual bridge that allowed the ideas of a small, tribal religion from Judea to flow out and become a world religion. The library, in its quest for universal knowledge, had inadvertently provided the textual foundation for the faith that would, centuries later, play a key role in its own destruction. This is one of the great, tragic ironies of history, an irony that was forged in the intellectual crucible of Alexandria. This then was the dream made real. A city that was a true crossroads of the world, a vibrant, chaotic, and brilliant melting pot of peoples, languages, and ideas. An institution, the Mauseon, that was a sanctuary for the mind, a haven for free inquiry, and a magnet for the greatest intellects of the age. And at its heart, a library that was a bold and optimistic attempt to create a complete and universal repository for the memory of humanity. It was a brief, shining, and incredibly precious moment in our collective history, a testament to what is possible when a civilization chooses to value knowledge, reason, and curiosity above all else. But this golden age, like all golden ages, was fragile. It was dependent on the rare and delicate alignment of royal patronage, political stability, and a cultural climate that cherished open and often challenging inquiry. And as the centuries passed, each of these 3 essential pillars began to slowly, inexorably crumble. The story of the library's decline is the story of a world that changed, a world that slowly, tragically, and perhaps inevitably, turned its back on the clear, demanding light of reason and embraced the comforting, passionate, and ultimately destructive shadows of dogma, chaos, and intolerance. And it is into those long, encroaching shadows that our journey must now take us. Let us now delve deeper into the specific, breathtaking discoveries that were made within this unique ecosystem of knowledge, the fruits of this unprecedented concentration of texts and minds. The Library of Alexandria was not merely a passive repository of past wisdom. It was an active, dynamic laboratory where that wisdom was tested, synthesized, and used as a launchpad for intellectual journeys into the unknown. The sheer range of these achievements is staggering, touching every field of human endeavor from the vastness of the cosmos to the intricate, hidden world of the human body. Let us return to the quiet, sunlit courtyard where Eratosthenes of Cyrene, the 3rd chief librarian, is contemplating the shape of the world. We have already touched upon his most famous achievement, the measurement of the Earth's circumference. But let us now immerse ourselves more fully in the sheer elegance and intellectual power of his method. The story begins, as many great discoveries do, with a piece of information he read in a book. He was reading a papyrus scroll, a geographical or astronomical text, and he came across a curious observation. The text noted that in the city of Syene, a town far to the south, near the modern city of Aswan, on the day of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year at precisely noon, the sun's rays shone directly down a deep well, illuminating the water at the bottom. This meant that the sun was perfectly, exactly vertically overhead. A stick or a post placed in the ground at that moment would cast no shadow at all. This was a fascinating but seemingly isolated piece of trivia. But to a mind like Eratosthenes, a mind steeped in the geometric logic of Euclid and trained to see the world as a series of interconnected patterns, this piece of trivia was a clue. It was a key that could unlock a much larger mystery. For Eratosthenes knew, from his own observations in Alexandria, that this was not the case in his city. On that very same day at that very same time, at noon on the summer solstice, a vertical object in Alexandria, like one of the great obelisks that adorned the city, most definitely cast a shadow. The sun was high, but it was not perfectly overhead. The existence of these two different observations at the same moment in time could only mean one thing, assuming that the sun was, as they believed, a very distant object whose rays were essentially parallel when they reached the earth. It meant that the surface of the earth itself was curved. If the earth were flat, the sun's rays would strike the ground at the same angle everywhere, and the shadows would be identical. But because the earth was a sphere, the parallel rays of the sun struck its curved surface at different angles in different places. Eratosthenes realized that this difference in angles, the very angle of the shadow he could measure in Alexandria, held the secret to the planet's size. Let us imagine him performing the experiment. He has a simple instrument, perhaps a gnomon, which is essentially a vertical stick of a known height, placed in the ground. Or perhaps he uses one of the city's great obelisks. At noon on the summer solstice, he carefully measures the length of the shadow it casts. Using simple trigonometry, a branch of mathematics largely developed by this point, he can calculate the angle of the sun's rays. He finds this angle to be about 7.2 degrees. Now he thinks in terms of circles. A full circle, the circumference of the Earth, is 360 degrees. His measured angle of 7.2 degrees is exactly 1/50th of a full circle. 360 divided by 7.2 is 50. This meant that the distance between the two cities, Alexandria and Syene, must therefore be 1/50th of the entire circumference of the planet Earth. The final piece of the puzzle was the distance itself. How far was it from Alexandria to Syene? Again, Eratosthenes did not need to mount a great expedition. He could go to the library. He could consult the official records of the royal surveyors, the Bemadists, the men whose job it was to measure the kingdom's land for the purposes of taxation and administration. These surveyors had measured the distance, likely by counting the steps of trained camels or by using a rolling measuring device, and the accepted figure was approximately 5,000 stadia. The exact length of the ancient Greek stadion varies, but it was a standard unit of measurement, roughly the length of a sports stadium. Now Eratosthenes had all the pieces. He performed a simple multiplication, 5,000 stadia times 50. The result was 250,000 stadia for the full circumference of the Earth. Depending on which exact conversion for the stadion one uses, his calculation comes out to be astonishingly, almost miraculously, accurate. It is somewhere between 1% and 15% of the true value as measured by our modern satellites. He did this in the 3rd century BC, armed with a stick, a shadow, a well, and a library. It was one of the most beautiful and profound intellectual achievements in human history, a perfect marriage of observation, reading, and mathematical reasoning. Let us now turn our gaze from the macrocosm of the planet to the microcosm of the living body. In the gleaming marble halls of the dissection theater, the physicians Herophilus and Erasistratus were conducting a revolution of their own. Let us focus more closely on the work of Herophilus, a man so revered for his discoveries that he would later be known as the father of anatomy. As we have discussed, the royal sanction to dissect human bodies gave him an unprecedented window into the hidden workings of our own biology. Imagine the scene. The body of an executed criminal lies on a stone table. Herophilus is not a butcher, he is an explorer. With the delicate precision of a watchmaker, he begins his investigation. He opens the skull and confronts the brain. Prior to this, Aristotle, the great authority, had taught that the heart was the seat of intelligence and that the brain was merely a cooling organ, a kind of radiator for the blood. Herophilus, through direct observation, proves this wrong. He carefully dissects the brain, distinguishing the large, wrinkled cerebrum from the smaller cerebellum at the back of the skull. He traces the pathways of the nerves, noting that they all seem to lead to the brain and the spinal cord. He makes the profound intellectual leap that the brain is the central processing unit of the body, the seat of consciousness and the origin of thought. He studies the eye with incredible detail, dissecting its delicate structures and describing the retina, the cornea, and the optic nerve, which he correctly identifies as the conduit for transmitting visual information to the brain. He turns his attention to the vascular system. He is the first to accurately distinguish between arteries and veins. He notes that the walls of the arteries are thicker and more elastic than those of the veins. By observing a severed artery, he notes that blood pulses out of it, and he realizes that this pulse corresponds to the beat of the heart. He is on the verge of discovering the circulation of the blood, a discovery that would not be fully articulated until William Harvey in the 17th century. He even develops a portable water clock, a clepsydra, which he uses to measure the pulse of his patients, bringing a new level of quantitative precision to medical diagnosis. His contemporary Erasistratus made equally stunning discoveries. He studied the heart in great detail, describing the function of the heart valves, the tricuspid, the mitral, the aortic, and the pulmonary valves, and understanding their role in ensuring that blood flows in only one direction. He came remarkably close to a full understanding of the circulatory and respiratory systems, proposing that air was taken into the lungs, and that a form of it, which he called pneuma, was then carried by the arteries to the rest of the body to provide it with life. The combined work of these two men, Herophilus and Erasistratus, represents a golden age of medical science. They wrote dozens of treatises on anatomy, on pharmacology, on diagnosis. All of these original works, the foundational texts of scientific medicine, are now lost. We know of their incredible discoveries only through the summaries and often critical comments of later physicians like the Roman Dr. Galen, who lived centuries later and who, while preserving their memory, also managed to misinterpret and corrupt much of their work. The loss of these texts is, without question, one of the greatest intellectual tragedies in the history of science. It represents a setback of at least 1,500 years in our understanding of our own bodies. And what of the heavens? Let us now visit the observatory of the Maison, perhaps a high, flat rooftop on one of the palace buildings, a place with a clear, unobstructed view of the brilliant, star-dusted Egyptian night sky. Here, Aristarchus of Samos is at work. He is an astronomer, but he is also a brilliant mathematician. He is grappling with one of the oldest and most profound questions. What is the structure of the cosmos? The prevailing model, the one that made perfect intuitive sense, was the geocentric model. The Earth was a stable, unmoving sphere at the center of the universe, and the Moon, the Sun, and the 5 known planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, revolved around it in a series of complex, crystalline spheres. But Aristarchus, a bold and original thinker, was not satisfied with this model. Perhaps he found it too complex, too messy to account for the strange retrograde motions of the planets. He performs a remarkable feat of mathematical astronomy. By observing the Moon during a lunar eclipse, he is able to estimate the size of the Earth's shadow and thereby calculate the relative size of the Moon. He then observes the Moon when it is exactly half full, a phase called dichotomy. At this precise moment, he knows that the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun form a perfect right-angled triangle. By measuring the angle between the Moon and the Sun in the sky at that moment, he is able to calculate the relative distances of the Moon and the Sun from the Earth. His measurements were not very accurate because the angle he needed to measure was extremely difficult to determine with the naked eye. But his method was mathematically sound. And his results, even though inaccurate, led him to a staggering conclusion. The Sun was vastly, enormously larger than the Earth. And this conclusion led him to his next revolutionary and deeply counterintuitive thought. Does it make logical sense, he wondered, for this immense, gigantic body, the Sun, to be orbiting our own, comparatively tiny Earth? Or is it not far more likely, far more elegant, that our small Earth is the one that is in motion, orbiting the vast, fiery furnace of the Sun, which is the true stable center of the system? He proposed it. The first complete heliocentric model of the solar system. The Earth, he argued, was just another planet, spinning on its own axis once a day, and orbiting the Sun once a year. It was an idea of breathtaking intellectual courage. It demoted humanity from its privileged position at the center of creation. It was a vision of the cosmos that was, in its essence, correct. But it was too much, too soon. We know of his theory only because later writers like Archimedes and Plutarch mention it, often in order to dismiss it. Archimedes wrote, Aristarchus of Samos brought out a book consisting of some hypotheses. His hypotheses are that the fixed stars and the Sun remain unmoved, that the Earth revolves about the Sun on the circumference of a circle, the Sun lying in the middle of the orbit. The book itself, the scroll that contained the full arguments and calculations of this ancient Copernicus, is lost. Its disappearance is another one of the library's most profound ghosts, a ghost of a scientific revolution that failed to ignite. The intellectual ferment of Alexandria was not confined to these great, paradigm-shifting discoveries. It also produced engineers and inventors of genius. Let us consider Ctesibius, a fascinating figure who lived in the 3rd century BC and was said to be the son of a barber. He was the father of pneumatics, the study of compressed air and its mechanical uses. He invented a whole array of ingenious devices. He created a water organ, the hydraulis, which used water pressure to supply a continuous, steady flow of air to the pipes, creating a powerful and versatile musical instrument that was the forerunner of the great church organs of Europe. He invented a force pump, a brilliantly designed cylinder and plunger system with valves, which could shoot a jet of water with great force and was used for centuries as the primary engine for firefighting. And, most importantly for the intellectual life of the city, he perfected the water clock, the clepsydra. He designed an intricate system with gears and feedback mechanisms that allowed his clock to keep time with unprecedented accuracy, compensating for changes in water pressure and even featuring moving, automated figures that would mark the hours. In a world without mechanical clocks, Ctesibius's invention provided the scholars and astronomers of the Mouseion with the one thing they needed most: a way to accurately measure the passage of time. And then there was Heron, who lived several centuries later in the Roman period, but who carried on this tradition of Alexandrian ingenuity. We have spoken of his steam engine, the Eolipile. But he invented so much more. He wrote treatises on automata, describing how to build what were essentially programmable robots for the theater, little carts that could move on their own in a predetermined pattern, powered by falling weights and intricate systems of ropes and pulleys. He described a device that, when you lit a fire on an altar, would use the expansion of the hot air to force water out of a vessel, which would then, through a system of counterweights, make the temple doors swing open as if by divine power. He was a master of what we would now call special effects, using his scientific knowledge to create a sense of wonder and magic. But underlying all these toys was a deep, systematic understanding of mechanics, of pneumatics, of engineering principles. His collected works, which partially survive, represent the absolute pinnacle of ancient engineering. And they pose a tantalizing question. With all this knowledge of gears, of pumps, of steam power, of automata, why did the ancient world not have an industrial revolution? The answer is complex, rooted in the social and economic structure of a slave-based society, which had little incentive to invest in labor-saving machinery. The scientific knowledge was present, recorded on the scrolls of the library, but the world around it was not yet ready or willing to use it. The intellectual fire of Alexandria, however, was not fueled by science and engineering alone. The library was, first and foremost, the world's greatest repository of literature, and the scholars of the Mouseion were the first to approach the study of poetry, drama, and history not merely as works to be enjoyed, but as artifacts to be systematically analyzed, categorized, and preserved. They were the inventors of literary criticism, of grammar, of philology, and of the very concept of a canon of great works. Their labor, carried out in quiet halls over many generations, created the intellectual framework through which we still view the classical world. Let us return to the figure of Callimachus of Cyrene, a scholar who worked in the library during the reign of Ptolemy II and Ptolemy III. He was a man of immense learning and a famously cantankerous personality, a poet who famously declared, "A big book is a big evil," championing a style of poetry that was short, dense, witty, and filled with obscure scholarly allusions. But his most enduring legacy was not his poetry, but his monumental work of organization, the Pinox. As we have noted, this was the great catalogue of the library, a work that stretched to 120 papyrus scrolls. But to call it a mere catalogue is to do it a profound injustice. It was a comprehensive, critical, and biographical encyclopedia of the entire corpus of Greek literature. Let us try to imagine the sheer daunting scale of the task Callimachus set for himself. He was attempting to impose a rational order on the glorious, chaotic, and often contradictory outpourings of 1,000 years of Greek thought. He began by dividing the entire literary universe into broad categories: epic and lyric poetry, tragedy, comedy, history, philosophy, oratory, medicine, and miscellaneous. Within each of these categories, he then arranged all known authors in alphabetical order. And for each author, his entry was a miniature masterpiece of scholarship. It would begin with a short biography of the author, including their father's name, their place of birth, and the names of their teachers. It would then provide a complete list of all their known works. For each of these works, Callimachus would provide the first line of the text, the incipit, which served as a unique identifier, much like a modern catalog number. He would then give a summary of the work's content and, most importantly, a count of the number of lines it contained, a crucial piece of data for identifying complete versus partial copies. Finally, and most remarkably, he would often add a critical note about the work's authenticity. Based on his deep and unparalleled knowledge of an author's style, vocabulary, and meter, he would pass judgment on whether a work was genuinely by that author, or if it was a later forgery or a misattribution. The Pinox was, in essence, a map of the entire intellectual world. It was a tool that allowed a scholar to navigate the vast, overwhelming ocean of the library's collection. With it, a reader could discover all the works of a particular author, or trace the development of an entire genre of literature. It was an act of intellectual world-building, a testament to the Alexandrian belief that all knowledge could and should be brought into a single, coherent, and rationally organized system. The original Pinox is, of course, lost. Its disappearance is perhaps the most painful loss of all, for it was the index to everything else that was lost. We know of it only through later summaries and references. But even these fragments give us a heartbreaking glimpse of the sheer richness of the world we have lost. They are like a surviving menu from a magnificent banquet where almost all the dishes have been thrown away. We can read the names of the dishes, we can see the ingredients, but we can never taste them. It is from these fragments of the Pinox that we know, for instance, that the three great Athenian tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, wrote a combined total of over 300 plays. These were not obscure minor works. They were the foundational texts of the Western dramatic tradition, performed in great state-sponsored festivals, and known and loved by the entire Greek world. Today, through a series of historical accidents, the chances of which manuscripts happen to be selected for copying in medieval monasteries, we have only 33 of these plays in their complete form. Aeschylus is said to have written around 90, we have 7. Sophocles wrote over 120, we have 7. Euripides wrote at least 92, we have 19. The other 90%, the vast, dark matter of the tragic universe, has vanished into silence. Imagine the lost stories, the lost characters, the lost insights into the human condition. Imagine the lost masterpiece, the play that was considered in antiquity to be even greater than Oedipus Rex or the Orestia. We will never know it. The losses in comedy are, if anything, even worse. The great master of Athenian Old Comedy, Aristophanes, is the only one whose works survive in any number, and we have only 11 of his approximately 40 plays. But he was just one of many brilliant comic playwrights. We know the names of dozens of others, men like Cratinus and Eupoles, who were considered his equals or even his superiors by ancient audiences. Their works are gone, surviving only in tiny quoted fragments. And this is just the old comedy. The new comedy of the Hellenistic period, a more subtle, character-driven form of comedy of manners, was dominated by the genius of Menander. He was the most popular and celebrated playwright of his age, the ancient world's equivalent of Shakespeare or Molière. He wrote over 100 plays. For almost 2,000 years, his entire body of work was believed to be lost, known only through the Roman adaptations of his plays by writers like Plautus and Terence. Then, in the 20th century, a series of miraculous discoveries in the sands of Egypt unearthed substantial portions of several of his plays on papyrus, including one, the Dyskolos or the Grouch, in an almost complete form. The discovery was a literary sensation. It was like finding a lost play by Shakespeare. And it serves as a tantalizing reminder that there may still be other lost treasures, other fragments of the Alexandrian world, waiting to be rediscovered beneath the desert. Let us consider the loss in the field of history. We revere the works of Herodotus and Thucydides, the fathers of history. But their method of critical prose historical narrative was a Greek invention, and they were not the only practitioners. The library held a vast collection of historical works from across the ancient world. We have mentioned the lost histories of Egypt and Mesopotamia, written by Manetho and Berossus. But there were countless others. There were the works of Theopompus, a 4th century BC historian who wrote a massive 58-volume history of the age of Philip II of Macedon, which was said to be filled with rich, detailed ethnographic and sociological observations. It is gone. There was the work of Timaeus of Tauromenium, who wrote a monumental 40-volume history of Sicily and the Western Mediterranean, a crucial region about which our knowledge is now sadly patchy. It is gone. There were the complete, original memoirs of the men who had marched with Alexander the Great, the day-by-day campaign diaries of generals like Ptolemy himself and Aristobulus, the raw, first-hand material from which all later histories of Alexander were constructed. They are gone. We are like people trying to understand a vast and complex landscape at night, with only a few scattered points of light to guide us. The scholars of Alexandria had the full, sunlit view. And what of philosophy? We think of Plato and Aristotle as the twin pillars of Greek thought. And so they were. But they were not the only thinkers. The Hellenistic world was a vibrant, argumentative philosophical marketplace of ideas. The Stoics, the Epicureans, the Cynics, the Skeptics, all of these schools of thought flourished, debating the great questions of life. What is the nature of the universe? What is the path to a happy and virtuous life? How should society be organized? The library would have held the complete works of the founders of these schools. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism; Epicurus, the founder of Epicureanism; Pyrrho, the founder of skepticism. The original works of these foundational thinkers are almost entirely lost. We know of Stoic philosophy primarily through the later writings of Roman Stoics like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. We know of Epicurus's philosophy largely through the epic poem of the Roman writer Lucretius, De Rerum Natura. The original, foundational texts, the scrolls that were debated and studied in Alexandria, have vanished. We are reading the footnotes and the summaries, not the originals. Perhaps the most poignant loss of all is in the realm of lyric poetry. This was the genre of the personal, the emotional, the intimate. The library contained the canonical 9 lyric poets of ancient Greece. Among them was Sappho of Lesbos, a woman who was revered in antiquity as the 10th muse, a poet whose genius was considered equal to that of Homer himself. The library possessed her complete works, said to be organized into 9 volumes. These were poems of breathtaking beauty, of passionate love, of longing, of jealousy, of the bittersweet joys and sorrows of the human heart. For centuries, her work was known only through a handful of quotations in the works of other authors. Then, beginning in the late 19th century, archaeologists working at an ancient garbage dump in Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, began to find fragments of papyrus. Among the trash, the shopping lists, the tax receipts, the personal letters, they found shredded, tattered fragments of Sappho's lost poems. Each new fragment, no matter how small, is a global event in the world of classical scholarship. We now have one complete poem, the Ode to Aphrodite, and dozens of smaller, heartbreakingly beautiful fragments. A line here, a stanza there. We have the ghost of a voice, but the body of her work is gone forever, a casualty of the slow, indifferent decay of time. This, then, was the treasure that was held in trust for humanity within the walls of the Library of Alexandria. It was not just a collection of books. It was a nearly complete record of the first great flourishing of the rational and artistic human spirit. It was the collected memory of the ancient Mediterranean world. And the scholars of the Mouseion were its appointed guardians. Their work, of collecting, copying, editing, cataloging, and studying, was a sacred duty. It was a heroic, multi-generational effort to hold back the tide of chaos and forgetting, to create a permanent, ordered, and accessible universe of knowledge. For a few brief, shining centuries they succeeded. They built a world of light, a city of the mind that was, and remains, one of the greatest achievements in the history of our species. But the world outside the quiet, sunlit courtyards of the Mouseion was not a world of reason and order. It was a world of power, of passion, of ambition, and of faith. And the forces that drove this outer world, the forces of politics, of economics, and of religion, would ultimately prove to be far more powerful than the quiet, scholarly pursuit of truth. The dream of Alexandria was fragile. It was a delicate and complex ecosystem, and it was dependent on a rare and precarious balance of conditions. When those conditions changed, when that balance was lost, the ecosystem began to collapse. The story of the library's decline and fall is not a simple one. It is a long, slow, and complex tragedy, a story of a world that changed, a world that slowly and for a variety of reasons, lost the will and the capacity to sustain its greatest intellectual treasure. It is a story not of a single catastrophic event, but of a slow, creeping, and inexorable twilight that descended upon the world of classical antiquity. And it is into that long, gathering twilight that our journey must now proceed. The beginning of the end for the Library of Alexandria was not a dramatic, thunderous event. It did not announce itself with the clash of swords or the roar of a great fire. It began, as many great declines do, as a slow, creeping, and almost imperceptible political rot from within. It was a subtle shift in the cultural climate, a gradual erosion of the values that had made the institution possible in the first place. The golden age of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the age of the first 3 rulers who were not only powerful kings but also genuine patrons of learning, gave way to a long and sorry succession of weaker, more decadent, and often monstrously cruel rulers. The later Ptolemies were, for the most part, not enlightened scholar kings. They were men and women consumed by lavish court intrigues, by bitter and bloody succession battles with their own siblings, and by their own personal indulgence and paranoia. The quiet, scholarly work of the Mouseion, once the crowning glory of their dynasty, became a secondary concern, and eventually, an irrelevant and expensive luxury. The generous and seemingly limitless state funding for the Mouseion, the very lifeblood of its research and its acquisitions, began to dwindle. The salaries for the resident scholars, once a powerful lure for the greatest minds of the age, were often paid late or not at all. Appointments to the prestigious positions within the institution became not a recognition of intellectual merit, but a form of political patronage, a reward for loyalty to the ruling faction. The hallowed tradition of intellectual freedom, the sacred promise that a scholar could pursue any line of inquiry without fear of reprisal, was replaced by a dangerous and stifling demand for political orthodoxy. The scholars, as employees of the state, were expected to support the king in his endless political struggles. To remain neutral was to be suspect. To support the wrong claimant to the throne was to risk exile, imprisonment, or even death. The most notorious and destructive example of this political interference came during the reign of Ptolemy VIII Euergetes II, a man of immense physical girth and even greater cruelty, who was given the contemptuous nickname Physcon or Potbelly by the Alexandrian citizens who despised him. He ruled off and on in the middle of the 2nd century BC, and his reign was marked by a particularly brutal and bloody civil war against his own sister and wife, Cleopatra II. After finally winning this savage conflict, he conducted a vicious and systematic purge of Alexandria's intellectual class, whom he suspected, probably with some justification, of having harbored sympathies for his rivals. He unleashed his mercenaries on the city, and a great many of its leading scholars and artists were executed. He then issued a decree expelling all foreign scholars from Alexandria. This single act was a catastrophic, self-inflicted wound. The great minds who had made the Mouseion the envy of the entire world, the grammarians, the mathematicians, the astronomers, the physicians, were scattered to the four winds. They fled to Athens, to Rhodes, to Pergamum, and to other, smaller centers of learning throughout the Mediterranean. They took their knowledge, their methods, and their prestige with them, founding new schools and enriching the intellectual life of their new homes. But the great central heart of research in Alexandria was crippled. The institutional brain drain was severe, and the Mouseion never truly regained its former undisputed preeminence. It was a clear and brutal message to all who remained. In this new, more dangerous Alexandria, independent thought was a liability. The pursuit of knowledge had become a hazardous profession. Then, in the 1st century BC came the seismic arrival of Rome. The Roman Republic, by this time, had become the dominant power in the Mediterranean, a relentless, expansionist entity that was slowly but surely absorbing the older Hellenistic kingdoms into its growing empire. The story of Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemaic rulers, is the story of a brilliant, charismatic, and ultimately doomed attempt to navigate these treacherous new political waters and preserve Egypt's independence. Her famous and fateful relationships, first with Julius Caesar and then with Mark Antony, were not just romantic liaisons. They were desperate geopolitical gambles. And in the end, the gamble failed. After the crushing defeat of her and Antony's fleet at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC by their rival, the cool and calculating Octavian, Egypt's 300-year-old dynasty of Greek pharaohs came to an end. In 30 BC, Egypt was formally annexed as a province of the new Roman Empire. This profound political shift had equally profound long-term consequences for the library and for the intellectual life of Alexandria. The first direct physical damage to the library's vast collection occurred, as we have noted, during Caesar's earlier intervention in the Alexandrian Civil War in 48 BC. Trapped in the palace district and besieged by the forces loyal to Cleopatra's brother, Ptolemy XIII, Caesar's soldiers, in a desperate move, set fire to the enemy fleet in the harbor. The flames, fanned by the strong coastal winds, spread to the docks and consumed the warehouses and other buildings nearby. Several ancient authors, including the Roman philosopher Seneca, writing about a century after the event, state that 40,000 scrolls were destroyed in this blaze. This was, without question, a terrible loss, a cultural tragedy. But it is crucial to understand that this was not the burning of the Great Library itself. The main library and the Mouseion were located safely within the walled palace compound, the Bruchion, at a considerable distance from the harbor. What likely burned was a separate, external collection of scrolls, perhaps a warehouse where new books arriving by sea were stored and processed before being catalogued, or an annex containing scrolls intended for export. The library was wounded, perhaps severely, but it was not destroyed. The institution and its main collection survived. The more insidious and ultimately more fatal damage that occurred under Roman rule was a slow, creeping marginalization. Alexandria was no longer the glamorous capital of a proud and independent kingdom, whose rulers saw the library as their dynasty's crowning glory and a potent symbol of their cultural supremacy. It was now merely a provincial capital, albeit a very important and wealthy one, in a vast, sprawling and increasingly centralized empire whose true center of gravity was unequivocally Rome. Ambitious young scholars and writers from across the Mediterranean were now increasingly drawn not to the banks of the Nile, but to the banks of the Tiber. The great patrons of learning were no longer the Ptolemies, but the Roman emperors themselves. Emperors like Augustus and, later, Trajan and Hadrian were genuine patrons of learning and the arts, but their focus was, naturally, on building up the libraries and institutions of their own capital city. Rome, with its new imperial libraries like the Palatine and the Ulpian, began to supplant Alexandria as the intellectual hub of the world. The Library of Alexandria became a revered, but somewhat neglected, historical institution. It was no longer the cutting edge, it was a magnificent living museum, a monument to a glorious but bygone Hellenistic past. The flow of state funding from the new Roman governors, the very fuel that had powered the Mausians' ambitious research engine, was almost certainly reduced to a trickle, just enough to maintain the buildings and pay the salaries of a much-reduced staff. The aggressive, state-sponsored acquisition of new books, which had once been a defining obsession of the Ptolemies, slowed and then likely stopped altogether. The existing scrolls, thousands upon thousands of them, continued their slow, inevitable process of aging and decaying in the warm, sometimes humid Mediterranean air. Papyrus is a durable material, but it is not eternal. It becomes brittle with age, it is susceptible to mold, and it is a favorite food of bookworms. In its golden age, the library had employed a large staff of scribes whose constant duty it was to recopy old and worn-out scrolls to ensure their preservation. Under the more austere Roman administration, this vital, ongoing work of preservation was likely neglected. The great collection began to slowly, quietly, and inexorably shrink through simple, mundane attrition. The next great cataclysm to befall the city was a physical one, and it likely marks the true final end of the original Mausian and its great library as a functioning institution. The 3rd century AD was a time of profound and terrifying crisis for the Roman Empire, a 50-year period of near-constant civil war, barbarian invasions, plague and economic collapse, a period that has come to be known as the crisis of the 3rd century. Alexandria, with its strategic importance as the breadbasket of the empire and its notoriously rebellious and fractious population, was often at the very center of the storm. In the year 272 AD, the city rose in revolt against the authority of the Roman Emperor Aurelian, aligning itself with the breakaway Palmyrene Empire led by the famous and formidable Queen Zenobia. Aurelian, a tough and ruthless soldier emperor, marched his legions on Egypt to crush the rebellion. The forces loyal to Zenobia made their stand in Alexandria, fortifying themselves in the ancient heart of the city, the Bruchian district, the old royal quarter where the Mausian and the library had stood for over half a millennium. Aurelian's forces laid siege to the district. The fighting was savage, protracted, and fought street by street, house by house. The contemporary accounts describe a scene of almost total devastation. The entire district, the most beautiful and historic part of the city, was laid to waste. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing about a century later, noted that the walls of the Bruchian were razed to the ground, and that the district had become a deserted ruin, inhabited only by wild beasts. In the rubble and the flames of this brutal and destructive civil war, the Mausian, which had stood for over 500 years as the world's greatest beacon of human intellect, was almost certainly obliterated. Any scrolls that had remained in its collection after centuries of slow decline were likely turned to ash and dust. The great, original institution of the Ptolemies was gone, a casualty of the violent death throes of the classical world. It was a quiet, almost unnoticed death, a footnote in the larger, more dramatic story of an empire tearing itself apart. But the story of the dream of Alexandria does not end there. For the idea of a great library in the city was too powerful, too deeply ingrained in its identity, to die completely. The daughter library, which had been established centuries earlier at the magnificent temple of the pagan god Serapis, the Serapeum, had survived the chaos of the 3rd century. It was located in a different, more populous district of the city, Rhakotis, the old Egyptian quarter, and it was physically unharmed by Aurelian's sack of the Bruchian. It now became the sole heir to the legacy of the Great Library. It was the new, and now the only, great intellectual and spiritual center of a profoundly changing city. It was still, by any standard, a vast and important collection. The 4th century historian Ammianus Marcellinus, after describing the destruction of the library in the Bruchian, goes on to mention the Serapeum, describing its library with awe, noting that its book halls were once so full that they contained 70,000 volumes. While this number may be an exaggeration, it is clear that the Serapeum Library was a magnificent institution in its own right, a last great repository of classical learning. But the world it served was undergoing a profound and irreversible transformation. The Roman Empire, after the chaos of the 3rd century, was being reborn, and the soul of this new late Roman world was Christianity. After centuries of persecution, the Christian faith had not only survived but had triumphed. With the conversion of the Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century, Christianity became the favored religion of the state. And by the end of that century, under the rule of the devoutly Christian Emperor Theodosius I, it had become the official and only legal religion of the Roman Empire. A series of imperial decrees were issued, outlawing all pagan worship, ordering the closure of the ancient temples, and extinguishing the sacred fires that had burned for over 1,000 years. This was not just a political shift, it was a profound psychological and cultural revolution. The ancient Greco-Roman worldview, with its pantheon of gods and goddesses, its philosophical skepticism, and its celebration of the rational mind, was being actively and aggressively dismantled. It was being replaced by a new worldview, one based on faith, on divine revelation, and on the absolute authority of sacred scripture. In this new and fervent Christian world, the classical learning that was housed in the Serapeum Library came to be seen in a new and sinister light. The works of the ancient philosophers, the scientists, the poets, and the historians were increasingly viewed not as sources of wisdom and enlightenment, but as the literature of a superseded, demonic, and dangerously seductive pagan age. At best, they were useless distractions from the one true goal, the salvation of the soul. At worst, they were manuals of idolatry and heresy, filled with the lies of demons and the foolish vanities of a world that had not yet received the light of Christ. The intellectual climate was changing. The very value of the knowledge contained in the library was being called into question. The institution was becoming a relic, a magnificent but increasingly dangerous symbol of a dying world. The stage was now set for the final, tragic and violent act in the long, slow drama of the library's demise. The final act in the long, slow tragedy of the Library of Alexandria was not a quiet, drawn-out process of decay. It was a sudden, violent, and symbolic conflagration, a public and dramatic assertion of the power of a new world order over the old. The setting for this final act was the last great sanctuary of classical learning in the city, the magnificent temple complex of the Serapeum, and its precious daughter library. And the protagonist, or antagonist, depending on one's perspective, was a man who embodied the zealous, uncompromising, and often brutal spirit of the triumphant Christian church in the late 4th century. His name was Theophilus, and he was the Patriarch of Alexandria. To understand the events of the year 391 AD, we must first understand the city of Alexandria in this period. It was no longer the cosmopolitan, intellectually curious, and relatively tolerant city of the Ptolemies. It had become a tinderbox of religious fanaticism. The 4th century was a time of intense and often violent conflict, not just between Christians and the dwindling population of pagans, but also among the Christians themselves, who were bitterly divided by complex theological disputes and heresies, such as the Arian controversy. Alexandria, with its volatile and notoriously unruly population, was the epicenter of this religious turmoil. Street battles between rival mobs of Christian monks, pagan traditionalists, and Jewish communities were a common and bloody feature of urban life. The city was a cauldron of fervent, competing faiths, and Theophilus was its most powerful and ambitious Christian leader. Theophilus was not a scholar or a quiet contemplative. He was a master of political intrigue, a brilliant administrator, and a ruthless enforcer of orthodoxy. He saw himself as a warrior for Christ, and his primary mission was to utterly eradicate the last vestiges of paganism from his city. The ancient temples, with their magnificent statues, their centuries of tradition, and their deep cultural resonance, were, in his eyes, dens of demonic influence, a cancer that had to be surgically and violently removed. And the greatest and most prestigious of these pagan strongholds, the last great symbol of the old world's cultural and spiritual power, was the Serapeum. It stood on its Acropolis, a visible and proud monument to a faith and a worldview that Theophilus was determined to destroy. He was a man waiting for a pretext, an opportunity to bring down this hated rival. That opportunity arrived in 391 AD. The details are complex and disputed, but the basic outline is clear. A group of local Christians, perhaps with the encouragement of Theophilus, had taken over and desecrated a derelict pagan temple, a former temple of Dionysus. In the process, they had uncovered some hidden ritual objects, which they then paraded through the streets in a mocking procession, ridiculing the pagan mysteries. This public act of sacrilege was the final insult for the city's beleaguered pagan community. Enraged, they took up arms, attacked the Christians, and after a bloody street battle, retreated to their strongest and most defensible position in the city, the massive, fortified temple complex of the Serapeum. From within its high walls, they barricaded themselves, and for a time, a tense standoff ensued. They reportedly took Christian hostages, torturing them and even crucifying them within the sacred precinct of the temple. The situation had escalated into a full-blown urban insurrection. Theophilus, seeing his chance, appealed to the Roman Emperor Theodosius I in Constantinople. Theodosius, a devoutly Christian ruler who had already issued a series of increasingly harsh edicts against paganism, was a natural ally. He responded not by punishing the pagans for their violence, but by issuing a decree that, in effect, pardoned them for their crimes, but also granted Theophilus the authority to dispose of the temple itself as he saw fit. It was the death warrant for the Serapeum. Theophilus had the emperor's official sanction to destroy the last great bastion of paganism in his city. Let us imagine the final day. A vast crowd of Christian monks, zealots, and ordinary citizens, incited by the fiery sermons of Theophilus, has gathered at the base of the great 100-step staircase that leads up to the temple Acropolis. The pagan defenders, seeing that their cause is hopeless and that they are now acting in defiance of the emperor himself, have abandoned the temple. The crowd, like a great wave, surges up the staircase. They are led by Theophilus himself. They smash down the great bronze doors and pour into the sacred precinct. The scene within must have been one of both awe and savage destruction. They found themselves in vast, marble-lined halls, surrounded by the artistic treasures of centuries. But they saw not beauty but idolatry. The centerpiece of the temple was the colossal, magnificent cult statue of the god Serapis himself. It was a masterpiece of Hellenistic art, a towering figure made of precious metals and inlaid with ivory and gemstones, so revered that it was said that if any man touched it, the sky would fall and the world would end. For a moment, the mob hesitated, paralyzed by a residual, superstitious fear. Then a Roman soldier, perhaps on Theophilus's orders, took an axe and struck the statue's jaw. The crowd gasped, but the sky did not fall. The soldier struck again, and the head of the god crashed to the marble floor. The spell was broken. The mob, now in a frenzy of iconoclastic fury, fell upon the statue, and upon every other statue and work of art in the temple, smashing them to pieces with axes and hammers. They lit bonfires, they looted the temple's treasures, and they systematically, room by room, began the process of razing the entire complex to the ground. And what of the library? The historical accounts of this event, written by contemporary Christian historians like Rufinus and Socrates Scholasticus, focus on the destruction of the pagan idols and the triumph of the church. They do not, to our eternal frustration, explicitly mention the fate of the books. However, it is almost inconceivable that the library, housed as it was within this pagan temple complex, could have survived such a deliberate and fanatical act of destruction. The mob, in its determination to wipe out all traces of the pagan cult, would have seen the scrolls of ancient philosophy, science, and poetry not as a precious repository of knowledge, but as the very literature of the demons they believed they were exorcising. The scrolls would have been seen as fuel, as kindling for the fires of purification. The last great library of the ancient world, the final living institutional descendant of the Great Library of the Ptolemies, was almost certainly annihilated in this single, violent, and symbolic act of cultural purgation. On the smoking ruins of the Serapeum, Theophilus would later build a Christian church, a martyrion, a monument to the final, decisive victory of his faith over the wisdom of the ancient world. There is one more ghost in this long story of destruction that we must address. It is the popular, persistent, and dramatic tale that the Great Library was, in fact, destroyed by the Arab general Ammar ibn al-As, after the Muslim conquest of Egypt in the year 642 AD. This is the story that has been most widely repeated in later European accounts, and it has colored the popular perception of the library's end for centuries. According to this tale, which first appears in a detailed form in the writings of the 13th century Christian author Bar Hebraeus, the general Ammar was a man who appreciated the library's wisdom and was inclined to preserve it. He wrote to the Caliph Omar in faraway Medina, asking for instructions on what to do with the vast collection of books. The Caliph, a man of simple and austere faith, is said to have replied with a famous and chillingly logical dictum: "Touching the books you mention, if what is written in them agrees with the book of God, the Quran, They are redundant and unnecessary, and if it disagrees they are heretical and dangerous. In either case they should be destroyed. Upon receiving this order, Amr is said to have dutifully distributed the countless papyrus scrolls among the 4,000 public bathhouses of Alexandria, to be used as fuel for heating the water. The story concludes with a flair for the dramatic, that the number of scrolls was so vast that it took a full 6 months to burn them all. It is a powerful and memorable story. It provides a single clear culprit and a simple, easily understood motive of religious intolerance. But it is almost certainly a myth. The historical evidence for it is virtually non-existent. Contemporary accounts of the Muslim conquest, including the detailed chronicles written by the Christian Bishop John of Nikiu, who was an eyewitness to the events and deeply hostile to the new Muslim rulers, make absolutely no mention of any great library or any burning of books. If such a spectacular and catastrophic act of cultural destruction had actually occurred, it is almost impossible to believe that an eyewitness like John would have failed to mention it. The story appears in the historical record only 6 centuries after the event is said to have taken place. Most modern historians therefore believe that the tale was a later invention, a piece of anti-Muslim propaganda, perhaps created during the time of the Crusades, to depict the early leaders of Islam as ignorant barbarians who were enemies of learning. The sad and far less dramatic truth is that by the year 642 AD, there was likely no great library left in Alexandria for the Arabs to burn. The destruction was a long, slow suicide, a process carried out by the political decay, the civil wars, and the rising religious intolerance of the late Greco-Roman world itself. So, who burned the Library of Alexandria? There is no simple answer because there was no single act of burning. It was not a murder, it was a death by 1,000 cuts. A portion of its collection was burned by the soldiers of Julius Caesar, as an accidental casualty of war. It was starved by the neglect of the decadent later Ptolemaic kings. Its intellectual heart was ripped out by the purges of the tyrant Ptolemy VIII. Its buildings were likely razed to the ground by the armies of the Roman Emperor Aurelian in a brutal civil war. And its last surviving branch, its final precious remnant, was torched by a mob of Christian fanatics, incited by their own patriarch. But the deepest, most fundamental cause of its demise was a slow, profound change in civilization itself. It was a shift in the zeitgeist, a move away from the classical world's belief in the power of human reason and open-ended inquiry, and towards a new world's yearning for the certainty of divine revelation and the salvation of faith. The true tragedy of the library was not just the loss of the scrolls, but the loss of the world that had created them, a world that had possessed the cultural will and the intellectual curiosity to believe that such a magnificent and audacious dream was worth pursuing in the first place. The fires that destroyed the library were, in the end, simply the physical manifestation of a profound change in the intellectual climate of the world. The world had grown cold to the light of Alexandria. And so we are left with the ghost. The ghost of a place, the ghost of an idea, and the ghost of a future we almost had. What, then, is the ultimate legacy of this lost dream? It is a complex and deeply paradoxical legacy, a story of both profound and heartbreaking loss, and of the incredible, almost miraculous resilience of the human intellect. The loss is almost impossible to quantify, or even to fully comprehend. We are a species with a fractured memory, a civilization with a form of profound amnesia. We lost centuries of scientific progress. We lost the chance to know the ancient world in its full, complex, and contradictory richness, from the inside out, through the voices of its own poets, historians, and philosophers. We are like archaeologists who have found the ruins of a magnificent, unknown city, but have only a few scattered and broken inscriptions with which to reconstruct its history, its language, and its soul. We can stand on the shore of the vast ocean of what has been lost, and look at the handful of beautiful polished shells that have happened to wash up, and try, with our limited imaginations, to picture the vibrant, teeming, and infinitely complex ecosystem of knowledge that once thrived in its depths and is now gone forever. But the legacy is also, miraculously, one of survival. The knowledge of Alexandria, even in its own time, was never truly contained within its marble walls. The scholars who had the immense privilege of studying there carried its ideas, its methods, and its intellectual fire with them when they left, planting the seeds of Alexandrian learning in other, smaller centers across the Mediterranean world. The most important texts it preserved and standardized were copied and sent to other libraries, to Rome, to Pergamum, and most consequentially, to the great imperial city of Constantinople. And, most importantly for the future of the West, after the final collapse of the Roman Empire in the West, as Europe descended into a period of fragmentation and intellectual stagnation that we now call the Dark Ages, the torch of Greek learning, the very light of Alexandria, was picked up and carried forward by the brilliant scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. In cities like Damascus, Cairo, and especially in Baghdad, the capital of the Great Abbasid Caliphate, a new and profound respect for ancient Greek wisdom flourished. The caliphs, like Al-Ma'mun in the 9th century, founded their own great library and research institute, the Beit al-Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom, in explicit and conscious emulation of Alexandria. They sent their own agents out across the world, not to conquer, but to acquire the surviving Greek manuscripts from the libraries of the Byzantine Empire and from forgotten monasteries in Syria and the Near East. They sponsored a massive, state-funded translation movement, a project on a scale not seen since the time of the Ptolemies. A diverse team of scholars, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, worked together to translate the great works of Greek science and philosophy into the Arabic language. They translated the geometry of Euclid, the astronomy of Ptolemy, the medical works of Hippocrates and Galen, and most importantly, the complete philosophical corpus of Aristotle. And they did not just passively preserve this knowledge. They critiqued it, they refined it, they built upon it, making their own monumental and original contributions in mathematics, with the development of algebra, in medicine with the establishment of the first true hospitals and the work of physicians like Avicenna, in astronomy with the building of sophisticated observatories, and in philosophy. And it was largely through the retranslation of these Arabic texts into Latin, a process that took place primarily in medieval Spain and Sicily, in the vibrant multicultural borderlands between the Christian and Islamic worlds, that the lost wisdom of the ancient world was gradually and painstakingly reintroduced to a slumbering Europe. This reintroduced knowledge provided the essential intellectual fuel that would ignite the flame of the Renaissance and, ultimately, launch the scientific revolution. In a very real sense, the light of modern science is a distant, refracted echo of the light that once shone so brightly in the halls of the Great Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria, then, is more than just a historical place that was lost. It is a myth. It is a symbol. And it is a profound and enduring warning. It has become for us a kind of cultural shorthand for the fragility of knowledge and the catastrophic consequences of its loss. When we speak of the burning of the library, we are often not just speaking of a specific historical event. We are speaking of a recurring pattern in human history, the cyclical and tragic conflict between knowledge and ignorance, between openness and dogma, between the slow, patient, and difficult work of building a civilization and the swift, easy, and often passionate work of tearing it down. The story of Alexandria has become a powerful and resonant parable, a story we tell ourselves to remind ourselves of what is at stake. Let us consider the symbolic power of the library. It represents one of the highest and noblest aspirations of our species, the desire to know, to understand, to collect the scattered fragments of human experience and assemble them into a coherent and meaningful whole. It is a symbol of the optimistic Enlightenment belief in the power of human reason to overcome superstition and to solve the great problems of the world. It represents the dream of a truly global conversation, a world in which all voices from all cultures could be gathered together and listened to. In this sense, the modern Internet, in its most idealistic form with its promise of universal access to all information, is a direct technological descendant of the dream of Alexandria. Wikipedia, the great digital encyclopedias, the online archives of academic journals, these are all, in their own way, attempts to rebuild a modern digital version of the Pinox of Callimachus, to create a universal map of our ever-expanding intellectual world. The dream of Alexandria is alive and well. It has simply changed its physical form from papyrus to pixels. But the story of the library is also, and perhaps more urgently, a warning. It is a chilling reminder that knowledge is not a permanent or self-perpetuating entity. It is a fragile and delicate ecosystem, one that requires constant care, constant vigilance, and constant investment to survive. A civilization can choose to turn its back on its own accumulated wisdom. It can decide that the difficult questions posed by science and philosophy are too unsettling, that the free exchange of ideas is too dangerous, that the certainties of a closed and dogmatic worldview are more comforting than the ambiguities and challenges of open inquiry. The story of Alexandria teaches us that a library is not just a building that houses books. It is an idea. It is a cultural commitment. And when that commitment falters, the books themselves, whether they are papyrus scrolls or digital files, become vulnerable. They are vulnerable to the fires of war, to the slow decay of neglect, and to the deliberate, fanatical acts of censorship and destruction. The forces that destroyed the Library of Alexandria are not ancient history. They are with us still. We see them in the modern-day burning of books, in the destruction of cultural heritage sites in times of war, in the deliberate spread of misinformation and propaganda, and in the political attacks on universities, on scientists, and on the very idea of objective truth. The spirit of the mob that stormed the Serapeum is an enduring and powerful force in human affairs. It is the spirit of anti-intellectualism, the spirit of fanatical certainty, the spirit that fears what it does not understand and seeks to destroy what it cannot control. The story of Alexandria warns us that the preservation of knowledge is not a passive act. It is an active and ongoing struggle. It requires courage, it requires resources, and it requires a profound and unwavering belief in the value of the human mind. Let us now reflect on the nature of the knowledge that was lost. We often speak of the loss of scientific treatises, of the forgotten technologies of steam engines and astronomical models. And this loss is indeed profound. We can only speculate on the different path our technological development might have taken had the works of Heron and Aristarchus been preserved and built upon. But to focus only on the loss of scientific knowledge is to miss a larger and perhaps more important point. What was also lost was a vast and irreplaceable treasure of humanistic knowledge. We lost the stories, the poems, the plays, the histories, and the philosophies that would have given us a richer, deeper, and more nuanced understanding of our own past and therefore of ourselves. Imagine for a moment that the situation were reversed. Imagine that a future civilization 1,000 years from now were to try and reconstruct the culture of our own time, but that all they had were the surviving works of a handful of authors. Imagine if all of Shakespeare's plays were lost, except for Titus Andronicus and the Comedy of Errors. Imagine if all of the music of Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven was gone, except for a few scattered fragments of their early compositions. Imagine if all the records of our own complex and tumultuous history were destroyed, save for a single biased account written by a political propagandist. This is the situation we find ourselves in when we look back at much of the ancient world. We are seeing a vast and magnificent landscape through a few small and often dirty windows. The Library of Alexandria, for a brief time, was a place with 1,000 windows, a panoramic and breathtaking view of the entire human experience in the ancient world. Its loss has impoverished us in ways we can barely begin to comprehend. We are a species with a fractured memory, and the story of Alexandria is the story of how that wound was first inflicted. But the story of Alexandria is not, in the end, a story of pure despair. It is also a story of the incredible, almost miraculous resilience of the human intellect and the strange, unpredictable ways in which ideas can survive. The knowledge of Alexandria, even as its physical home was crumbling, had already begun to spread. It was a testament to the power of the written word itself. An idea, once it is written down, has a life of its own. It can lie dormant for centuries, like a seed buried in the dry earth, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. And this is precisely what happened to the legacy of Alexandria. After the final collapse of the Roman Empire in the West in the 5th century AD, as Europe entered a period of profound political fragmentation, economic decline, and intellectual stagnation that we now, perhaps unfairly, call the Dark Ages, the great works of Greek science and philosophy were largely forgotten. The language of scholarship in the West became Latin, and very few Western scholars could still read Greek. The works of Plato and Aristotle were known, if at all, only through a handful of partial and often poor-quality Latin translations. But the torch of Greek learning, the very light of Alexandria, was not extinguished. It was picked up and carried forward by the brilliant and intellectually curious scholars of the burgeoning Islamic civilization. In the 8th and 9th centuries, under the rule of the great Abbasid caliphs in their magnificent new capital city of Baghdad, a cultural and scientific renaissance of unparalleled brilliance began. The caliphs, like Harun al-Rashid of 1001 Nights fame, and his son al-Ma'mun, were passionate patrons of learning. They founded their own great library and research institute, the Beit al-Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom, in explicit and conscious emulation of the great institution of Alexandria. They saw themselves not as the destroyers of the older civilizations, but as their rightful heirs. They sent their own agents out across the world, not to conquer, but to acquire the surviving Greek manuscripts from the still thriving libraries of the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, and from forgotten Christian monasteries in Syria and the Near East, where a tradition of Greek scholarship had been quietly preserved. They then sponsored a massive, state-funded translation movement, a project on a scale and with a level of intellectual rigor not seen since the time of the Ptolemies. A diverse and collaborative team of scholars, Nestorian Christians, Syriac-speaking Jews and Arabic-speaking Muslims, worked together in the House of Wisdom to translate the great works of Greek science and philosophy into the Arabic language. They translated the geometry of Euclid, whose elements became a foundational text for all Islamic mathematics. They translated the complex astronomical models of Ptolemy, whose Almagest, a name which itself comes from the Arabic, became the cornerstone of Islamic astronomy. They translated the complex astronomical models of Ptolemy, whose Almagest, a name which itself comes from the Arabic, became the cornerstone of Islamic astronomy. They translated the voluminous medical works of Hippocrates and especially of Galen, which formed the basis of medical education in the Islamic world for centuries. And most importantly, they translated the complete philosophical corpus of Aristotle, whose logical and metaphysical works would have a profound and transformative impact on the development of Islamic theology and philosophy. And they did not just passively preserve this knowledge. They engaged with it, they critiqued it, they debated it, and they built upon it, making their own monumental and original contributions in every field. In mathematics, they synthesized Greek geometry with the numeral system they had inherited from India, including the revolutionary concept of zero, to create the new and powerful language of algebra, an Arabic word. The scholar Al-Khwarizmi, from whose name we derive the word algorithm, was a pioneer in this field. In medicine, they established the first true secular public hospitals, with different wards for different diseases, and the work of physicians like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, with his great canon of medicine, would become the standard medical textbooks in Europe for over 500 years. In astronomy, they built sophisticated observatories in cities like Baghdad and Samarkand, where they refined the calculations of Ptolemy and created vast, incredibly accurate star charts. In philosophy, thinkers like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and Averroes engaged in a profound and sophisticated dialogue with the works of Plato and Aristotle, creating a rich and complex philosophical tradition that would have a deep and often unacknowledged influence on the later development of European thought. And it was largely through the retranslation of these Arabic texts, and the Arabic commentaries and editions that came with them, into Latin, a process that took place primarily in medieval Spain and Sicily, in the vibrant, multicultural, and often tolerant borderlands between the Christian and Islamic worlds, that the lost wisdom of the ancient world was gradually and painstakingly reintroduced to a slumbering Europe in the 11th and 12th centuries. This reintroduced knowledge, particularly the logical and philosophical works of Aristotle, was a profound intellectual shock to the system of medieval Christendom. It provided a new and powerful set of tools for thinking about the world, a new language of reason and inquiry that would ultimately challenge the dominance of pure faith. It was this rediscovered knowledge, the legacy of Alexandria filtered through the brilliant minds of Baghdad and Cordoba, that provided the essential intellectual fuel that would ignite the flame of the Renaissance and ultimately launch the scientific revolution. In a very real and tangible sense, the light of our own modern scientific world is a distant, refracted echo of the light that once shone so brightly in the halls of the Great Library of Alexandria. The seed that was planted by the Ptolemies on the banks of the Nile lay dormant for 1,000 years, but it was never truly dead. It survived and it bloomed again in a different time and in a different soil. So, the story of Alexandria is not just a story of a tragic ending. It is also a story of a long and winding journey, a story of the transmission of knowledge across cultures, across languages, and across the centuries. It is a testament to the enduring power of the written word to transcend the fall of empires and the clash of civilizations. It is a reminder that knowledge is not the exclusive property of any one people or any one age, but is a shared, collective, and ongoing human project. And so, as our long, deep journey through the labyrinthine corridors of time and memory comes at last to its final conclusion, let us leave the dream of Alexandria. Let us leave the scent of papyrus, the echo of forgotten debates, the silent ghosts of the scholars in their quiet, sunlit halls. The Great Library no longer exists on the shores of the Mediterranean. Its marble has been scavenged to build later cities, its scrolls have turned to dust and ash, its very foundations lie buried beneath the streets of a modern, bustling metropolis. But its spirit, its essential and audacious idea, endures. It endures in every library, great or small, in every university, in every laboratory, in every quiet room where someone opens a book or clicks on a link, and begins the sacred and timeless act of learning. It endures in the simple, profound, and unstoppable human desire to know. It exists as a dream of a world where all the stories, all the discoveries, and all the wisdom of humanity could be gathered together in one place, a testament to the power, the beauty, and the infinite potential of the curious mind. And in this peaceful, resonant, and hopeful dream, let your own mind now find its own quiet, its own library, its own well-deserved, deeply profound, and healing rest. Let us now, in this final chapter of our journey, reflect not just on the history of the library, but on its deeper, more philosophical meaning for us, here in our own time. What does the ghost of Alexandria have to say to a world that is, in so many ways, the very opposite of the ancient one? We live in an age not of information scarcity, but of overwhelming information abundance. We are not struggling to find and preserve a few thousand precious scrolls. We are drowning in a daily torrential flood of exabytes of digital data. And yet, the core challenges, the fundamental questions that the story of Alexandria poses, are perhaps more relevant now than they have ever been. The first great lesson of Alexandria is a lesson about the nature of knowledge itself. The scholars of the Mouseion understood that knowledge is not a static collection of facts to be memorized. It is a dynamic, living, and often contentious process. It is a conversation, not a monologue. The library was not great simply because it was big. It was great because it brought different ideas, different traditions, and different ways of thinking into direct and often uncomfortable proximity with one another. A Greek physician trained in the rational, secular methods of Hippocrates could walk down the hall and consult a text on ancient Egyptian magical healing practices. A mathematician steeped in the pure, abstract logic of Euclid could debate with an engineer who was trying to solve a messy, practical problem of hydraulics. A poet could argue with a historian about the nature of truth in storytelling. It was in the friction between these different perspectives, in the sparks generated by these intellectual collisions, that new knowledge was forged. This is a profound and vital lesson for our own, often polarized and fragmented world. We live in an age of digital echo chambers and ideological bubbles. Our algorithms are designed to feed us more of what we already believe, to shield us from opposing viewpoints, to create a comfortable but dangerously distorted sense of reality. The dream of Alexandria is the very antithesis of this. It is a dream of a shared, common space for knowledge, a place where all ideas can be brought to the table, where they can be examined, debated, and tested against the evidence. It is a reminder that true wisdom is not found in the comfortable certainty of our own beliefs, but in the courageous and often unsettling engagement with the beliefs of others. It teaches us that the path to truth is paved with dialogue, with criticism, and with a profound and humble respect for the complexity of the world. The second great lesson is about the relationship between knowledge and power. The Library of Alexandria was, from its very inception, a political project. It was founded by a king, funded by the state, and designed to be a potent symbol of the power, prestige, and cultural superiority of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Its mission to collect all the world's books was not just a scholarly endeavor. It was an act of intellectual imperialism, a declaration that Alexandria was the new center of the world, the place to which all knowledge must flow. This fusion of intellectual and political power was, for a time, incredibly productive. It provided the resources, the security, and the ambition that made the library's golden age possible. But the story of the library's decline is also a story about the inherent dangers of this relationship. When knowledge becomes too closely tied to the interests of the state, it becomes vulnerable to the shifting winds of politics. When the rulers are enlightened patrons, knowledge flourishes. But when the rulers are paranoid tyrants like Ptolemy VIII, the scholars are purged and the institution is crippled. When the state embraces a new ideology, a new religion, as the Roman Empire did with Christianity, the knowledge of the past can be re-evaluated overnight, its wisdom transformed into heresy, its preservation deemed not just unnecessary but dangerous. The story of Alexandria warns us of the vital importance of intellectual independence. It makes a powerful case for the need for institutions of learning, universities, libraries, research centers, to be protected from direct political control, to be cherished as autonomous spaces where inquiry can be pursued freely, without fear of reprisal. Knowledge, to be true, must serve no master but the truth itself. The third and perhaps most poignant lesson is about the nature of loss and the fragility of cultural memory. We, in the modern world, have grown accustomed to a sense of permanence. We record everything. We save everything to the cloud. We believe, perhaps naively, that our digital world is eternal, that our accumulated knowledge is safe from the fires and the floods that consumed the ancient world. But the story of Alexandria should give us pause. It teaches us that the preservation of knowledge is not the default state of the universe. The default state is chaos, decay, and forgetting. Entropy is the iron law of the cosmos, and it applies to information just as much as it applies to physical systems. The papyrus scrolls of Alexandria were fragile, and they required constant, dedicated human effort to be preserved and recopied. Is our own digital information any less fragile? It is stored on physical servers that require constant electricity and maintenance. It is encoded in formats that can become obsolete in a single generation. It is vulnerable to deletion, to corruption, and to the slow, invisible decay of what is sometimes called digital rot. A single, catastrophic solar flare, a global cyber attack, or simply a slow, collective decision to stop paying for the vast server farms that house our civilization's memory, could result in a loss of knowledge that would make the burning of the Serapeum look like a minor incident. The story of Alexandria is a call to action. It is a reminder that we are all, in our own way, librarians. We are all the guardians of our own small portion of the human story. The act of reading an old book, of telling a family story, of preserving a historical photograph, of teaching a child about the past. These are all small but vital acts of resistance against the encroaching darkness of forgetting. The preservation of our collective memory is not someone else's job. It is a sacred and ongoing responsibility that belongs to us all. Let us now, as we prepare to leave this dream of a lost world, reflect on the final human-scale tragedy of the library. We have spoken of the loss of great scientific treatises and epic poems. But what was also lost were the smaller, more intimate voices. The personal letters, the diaries, the legal contracts, the shopping lists, the schoolboy exercises, the very texts that, when they are found, bring the ancient world to life in all its mundane, relatable, and human detail. We have lost the voices of ordinary people. We have lost, to a very large extent, the voices of women, of slaves, of the conquered peoples of the Hellenistic and Roman worlds. The knowledge that was preserved, the knowledge that has come down to us, is overwhelmingly the knowledge of a small elite group of Greek and Roman men. The library, in its all-encompassing ambition, would have held a far richer and more diverse chorus of human voices. Its loss has not just impoverished our knowledge, it has narrowed our perspective. It has made it harder for us to see the ancient world as it truly was, a complex, multicultural, and multilingual tapestry of a million different stories. And so we are left with the ghost. The ghost of a place, the ghost of an idea, and the ghost of a future we almost had. What, then, is the ultimate legacy of this lost dream? It is a complex and deeply paradoxical legacy, a story of both profound and heartbreaking loss, and of the incredible, almost miraculous resilience of the human intellect. The loss is almost impossible to quantify, or even to fully comprehend. We are a species with a fractured memory, a civilization with a form of profound amnesia. We lost centuries of scientific progress. We lost the chance to know the ancient world in its full, complex, and contradictory richness, from the inside out, through the voices of its own poets, historians, and philosophers. We are like archaeologists who have found the ruins of a magnificent, unknown city, but have only a few scattered and broken inscriptions with which to reconstruct its history, its language, and its soul. We can stand on the shore of the vast ocean of what has been lost, and look at the handful of beautiful polished shells that have happened to wash up, and try, with our limited imaginations, to picture the vibrant, teeming, and infinitely complex ecosystem of knowledge that once thrived in its depths and is now gone forever. But the legacy is also, miraculously, one of survival. The knowledge of Alexandria, even in its own time, was never truly contained within its marble walls. The scholars who had the immense privilege of studying there carried its ideas, its methods, and its intellectual fire with them when they left, planting the seeds of Alexandrian learning in other, smaller centers across the Mediterranean world. The most important texts it preserved and standardized were copied and sent to other libraries, to Rome, to Pergamum, and most consequentially, to the great imperial city of Constantinople. And, most importantly for the future of the West, after the final collapse of the Roman Empire in the West, as Europe descended into a period of fragmentation and intellectual stagnation that we now call the Dark Ages, the torch of Greek learning, the very light of Alexandria, was picked up and carried forward by the brilliant and intellectually curious scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. In cities like Damascus, Cairo, and especially in Baghdad, the capital of the Great Abbasid Caliphate, a new and profound respect for ancient Greek wisdom flourished. The caliphs, like Al-Ma'mun in the 9th century, founded their own great library and research institute, the Beit al-Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom, in explicit and conscious emulation of Alexandria. They sent their own agents out across the world, not to conquer, but to acquire the surviving Greek manuscripts from the libraries of the Byzantine Empire and from forgotten monasteries in Syria and the Near East. They sponsored a massive, state-funded translation movement, a project on a scale not seen since the time of the Ptolemies. A diverse team of scholars, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, worked together to translate the great works of Greek science and philosophy into the Arabic language. They translated the geometry of Euclid, the astronomy of Ptolemy, the medical works of Galen, and, most importantly, the complete philosophical corpus of Aristotle. And they did not just passively preserve this knowledge. They critiqued it, they refined it, and they built upon it, making their own monumental contributions in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. And it was largely through the retranslation of these Arabic texts into Latin, a process that took place primarily in medieval Spain, in the vibrant multicultural borderlands between the Christian and Islamic worlds, that the lost wisdom of the ancient world was gradually and painstakingly reintroduced to a slumbering Europe. This reintroduced knowledge provided the essential intellectual fuel that would ignite the flame of the Renaissance and ultimately launch the scientific revolution. In a very real sense, the light of modern science is a distant, refracted echo of the light that once shone so brightly in the halls of the Great Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria, then, is more than just a historical place. It is a myth, a symbol, and a warning. It is a symbol of the highest aspirations of our species, our desire to understand the universe and our place within it. It is a testament to what is possible when a society chooses to invest in knowledge, to create a space for free inquiry, and to celebrate the power of the human mind. And it is a warning that knowledge is fragile, that civilization is a thin veneer, that the forces of ignorance, intolerance, and chaos are always waiting at the gates. It teaches us that a library is not just a building that houses books. It is an idea. The idea that the past has something to teach us, that the future is worth thinking about, and that the collected wisdom of humanity is our most precious and most vulnerable treasure. And so, as our long, deep, and final journey through the labyrinthine corridors of time and memory comes at last to its end, let us leave the dream of Alexandria. Let us leave the scent of papyrus, the echo of forgotten debates, the silent ghosts of the scholars in their quiet, sunlit halls. The Great Library no longer exists on the shores of the Mediterranean. Its marble has been scavenged to build later cities, its scrolls have turned to dust and ash, its very foundations lie buried and forgotten beneath the noisy streets of a modern, bustling metropolis. But its spirit, its essential and audacious idea, endures. It endures in every library, great or small, in every university, in every laboratory, in every quiet room where someone opens a book or clicks on a link and begins the sacred and timeless act of learning. It endures in the simple, profound, and utterly unstoppable human desire to know. It exists as a dream of a world where all the stories, all the discoveries, and all the wisdom of humanity could be gathered together in one place, a testament to the power, the beauty, and the infinite potential of the curious and courageous mind. And in this peaceful, resonant, and hopeful dream, let your own mind now find its own quiet, its own library, its own well-deserved, deeply profound, and healing rest.